Chapter 430. Madame Wang got off the carriage and walked a few steps. A servant girl beside her suddenly looked terrified. She pointed upwards and exclaimed, "Madam, look." Madame Wang raised her head to take a look and was shocked. On both sides of the cliff, there were more than 10 black-furred ape demons. They were climbing vines and hanging ropes, staring at the crowd. One of the ape demons was abnormally burly. Its body was covered with dense hair and its muscles were extremely thick. It was obvious that it was the leader of the demons. Above its head, there were wisps of cloud-shaped spiritual chi. This was a sign that it was about to transform into a human. He looked at Madame Wang, and as if he was a human, his eyes revealed a lustful look, and he cried out excitedly. Following his cry, the ape demons also let out shrill cries, and the noise made everyone feel dizzy and their ears ringing, and their hearts flustered. Everyone's expression changed. The guards of the caravan also picked up their weapons and stood with their backs against the carriage. They looked extremely nervous. The other apes were easy to deal with, but this ape king was so ferocious. If all of them rushed down together, it would be difficult to deal with. After the ape king cried out, it leaped down from the cliff and landed not far away from Madame Wang. Someone shouted, "Protect the madam." Lady Wang was immediately surrounded by more than 20 family guards. They held a spear in one hand and formed a shield formation, protecting her and the 2 maids in the middle. Facing the ape demons, they did not dare to be careless. Without hesitation, they bit the secret medicine given by the Taoist palace. A bitter taste went down their throat. In an instant, they were 100 times more spirited. Their faces were flushed and they let out low sounds. Because of the abundance of spiritual chi in the middle pillar state, there were many demons and monsters in the mountain. If they did not have something to rely on, how would they dare to walk here? Therefore, the guards of the caravan were prepared with the secret medicine made by the Lai Xian order. With just one divine power pill, one would be able to have 5 times the strength of one's own in a moment. They could fight with demons and monsters. Although it was Madame Wang's first time leading a caravan, she was surprised to see a demon. Not only was she not afraid, she even said loudly, "Thank you for your protection. After defeating the ape demons, each of you will be rewarded with a silver ingot. I will not go back on my words." Hearing this, the guards were excited. A person who looked like the leader shouted, "Did you all hear that? Madam has given a reward. If anyone dares not to put in the effort, they will be punished. Just wait and see how I'll deal with him when we get back." These guards were very experienced in dealing with spiritual monsters. The shield formation was also very strong. The ape king tried to rush in a few times, but it was still unable to enter. At this moment, he suddenly heard a loud shout from behind. A figure jumped out and punched the back of its neck. Although the ape king's body was big, it was abnormally agile. It turned around and used its arms to block the attack. With a muffled sound, both he and the figure took a few steps back. Just now, everyone could clearly see that the person who had attacked was a burly middle-aged man. However, above his head, there was a talisman floating in the air, releasing a stream of clear air from time to time. They hung down like tassels and enveloped his entire body, making him seem mighty and extraordinary. Someone exclaimed, "It's Captain Qi." The man and the ape confronted each other for a while. The ape demon seemed to know that it couldn't win against this person, so it roared a few times to demonstrate its strength. Then, it took a few steps back and suddenly leaped towards the cliff. It turned around and roared again. Pulling the vine rope, it swayed a few times and disappeared. The apes also retreated. Everyone in the caravan let out a sigh of relief and praised, "Captain Qi is really capable." Captain Qi laughed loudly and turned around to look at Madame Wang. He cupped his fists and said, "Madam, you must have been frightened." Madame Wang raised her wrist and said, "Someone, give Captain Qi 2 gold ingots. Other than the silver just now, give everyone another 20 strings of coins." She bowed to Captain Qi and said, "We still need to rely on Captain Qi in the future." Captain Qi waved his hand and said, "Madam, what are you saying? However, to pass this dangerous road, it's still us old people who can do it. Those outsiders are ultimately unreliable. Madame Wang smiled faintly and didn't speak to him anymore. She brought the two maids and walked towards the caravan. Captain Qi saw that just now, when she was being stared at by the Ape King, she was still very calm and didn't panic at all. He admired her in his heart and thought, this woman is really bold. No wonder Master Deng took a liking to her. Madame Wang went to the middle of the caravan to look for Zhang Yan and Li Mu. At this moment, one of the maids beside her said, when we were surrounded by those apes, I was scared to death. Those two Taoist priests actually didn't make a move. Could it be that they are just people who look impressive? Madam, don't be fooled by them. Madame Wang looked at her coldly and said, I have my own plans for this matter. Since when is it your turn to interrupt? If I hear such words again in the future, you can take your monthly allowance and go on your way. The maid was so frightened that her pretty face turned pale. She didn't dare to make another sound. Not long after, Madame Wang saw Zhang Yan and Yugu talking to each other. She hurriedly went forward and curtsied, saying, Greetings to the two Taoist priests. Now that I've encountered a difficult matter, I'll have to rely on the two of you. Zhang Yan and enlightened Yugu looked at each other and said with a smile, Madame Wang, please speak. Madame Wang told them the whole story. She didn't hide the inside story and even frankly told them her own speculations. In the end, she said, right now, I have no choice but to go to that bottomless valley. It's just that although this Taoist Qigong has never killed or robbed merchants in the past, it's better to be safe than sorry. My subordinates may be able to deal with ordinary monsters, but against someone who knows how to use Taoist spells, they're powerless. I'll have to ask the two of you to lend me a hand. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. Actually, if a Dan Shah appeared, it wouldn't be difficult to bring the entire caravan to that cliff. However, this would be too shocking, so he needed to change the route. Thus, he smiled and said, Martial Uncle and I have troubled you for many days and we owe Madam a favor. Madame Wang, there's no need for you to take a detour. I have a way for you to pass through here. Hearing that he had a way for them to not take a detour, Madame Wang was delighted. She didn't ask about the method and just curtsied and said, then I'll have to trouble the two Taoists. Hearing that the two Taoists in the caravan were going to cast a spell for them to pass through the deep ravine, everyone in the caravan was curious and squeezed to the front of the cliff to watch. When Steward Wu and Qi Weiling heard the news, Steward Wu immediately panicked and said in panic, if that's really the case, wouldn't we have worked hard for nothing? Qi Weiling sneered, why are you panicking? Don't tell me he can fly us over. In his impression, those who could fly in the sky and ride the wind and clouds were all unattainable. He was originally from Huizhu Daoist Palace, which was the lower house of Lai Xian order, but there wasn't a single person who could do that, let alone bring hundreds of people over. Thus, his first reaction was disbelief. Zhang Yan and Madame Wang came to the edge of the cliff together. He took a few glances and under everyone's gaze, he raised his hand and pointed downwards. Immediately, a white mist extended from his feet, it was as wide as the mountain path and instantly connected to the other side. He turned and bowed, Madame Wang, it's time to go. Everyone was dumbfounded. The mist was thin and seemed to be able to see through it to the abyss below. People could walk on this path. Madame Wang frowned slightly, then relaxed and smiled, Taoist's method is quite novel. Let me try it first. Madam. You mustn't. You mustn't. Steward Wu separated the crowd and stopped her while panting. He stomped his feet and said, Madam, you mustn't. This is clearly just a layer of mist. How can it surpass others? You mustn't listen to the nonsense of these two Taoists. Steward Wu really wanted Madame Wang to die, but this woman was specifically requested by Celestial Master Deng. If she died here, he wouldn't be able to explain himself. Thus, he came up and tried to persuade her. Madame Wang looked around and said, Steward Wu is old. Why aren't you guys looking after him? Hurry up and help him down. Steward Wu was immediately helped down by a few guards. Madame Wang turned around and looked at the thin mist. She took a deep breath and stretched out her foot to take a step forward. After testing it, she felt like she was stepping on solid ground. She couldn't help but feel relieved. She took a few more steps forward and stopped. She waved at the two maids behind her and said, "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and follow me." At this time, she had already walked more than 10 feet away from the cliff. From the perspective of others, it was as if she was standing in midair. Below her was a bottomless abyss and there was nothing left to rely on. Just looking at it made one feel dizzy and weak in the legs. The two maids couldn't take it anymore. They supported each other and slowly walked forward. They didn't dare to look down. Not long after, the three of them reached the other side of the cliff. Steward Wu was dumbfounded. He rubbed his eyes as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Suddenly, his whole body trembled and he came back to his senses. He pulled Qi Weiling beside him and said, "What should we do? If Immortal Master Deng blames us, our lives will be in danger." Qi Weiling was also very annoyed. He waved his hand away and said, "Now that things have come to this, we can only write a letter." In the branch altar of Lai Xian sect in Song country, a Taoist priest who was 20 feet tall was waving his fists and legs under the waterfall, as if he was practicing a set of brilliant fighting techniques. With every movement of his, the rushing water also swelled and surged. At this time, an ape jumped over and landed on a reef in front of him. It lay on top of the reef and held a letter high up. The Taoist walked forward and opened the letter. With just one look, his eyes revealed a fierce glint. He raised his leg and kicked the ape spirit. Blood spurted out of his mouth and he fell into the water with a splash. The Taoist opened his mouth and scolded, "You can't even handle such a small matter. What else can I expect from you?" He clenched his fist and crushed the letter into pieces. Madame Wang was beautiful, and there was a place under the name of the Wang family that produced Guang tea. It was one of the good things that Huiju Daoist temple had to offer to the upper court every year. It was very beneficial to his cultivation, so he had long wanted to get his hands on it. However, Madame Wang also had some background. If he tried to force his way, his senior and junior brothers would inevitably come out to stop him. His original plan was for Daoist Jikong to come out and secretly snatch Madame Wang. He would then take her as a concubine and train her in the palace. That way, he could occupy her and seize her land. However, he never thought that two Taoists would ruin his plan. Now it seemed that he wouldn't be able to do it if he didn't make a move. The Taoist's face was gloomy. He took out a small flute and blew it. An eagle's cry could be heard from the sky, and an iron-winged eagle descended. He flipped over the eagle's body and shouted. Then, he rode on the eagle and flew towards the south. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 431. Priest Deng flew on the eagle and arrived at the exit of the ravine in less than 2 days. However, he waited outside the mountain for half a day and did not see the caravan come out. Just as he was getting impatient, he suddenly saw someone running down the mountain. From the looks of it, it was Qi Weiling's subordinate. He had seen him once before. He descended to the front of the guard and said with a cold face, "What's going on? Why are you here? Where did everyone go? Where's Qi Zhong?" When the guard saw Priest Deng, he immediately knelt down and answered while panting, "Immortal Master Deng, the caravan has gone to Hanjing." Priest Deng was startled, then he said angrily, "Nonsense. The paths in the mountain are winding and winding. After I received the letter, I rushed here at full speed. No matter how fast my feet are, I can only leave the mountain today. Besides, on my way here, I didn't see a single person. How could I have gone to Han capital? Are you trying to lie to me?" At this time, the guard had somewhat caught his breath. He saw that this immortal master was really angry, so he didn't dare to say anything. He reached into his pocket and searched for a while before taking out a letter. He held it high above his head and said, "This is the letter that Captain Chi left for Immortal Master." Priest Deng took it and read it. Only then did he understand the reason behind it. He was so angry that the corners of his eyes twitched and he kept cursing, "Trash." It turned out that Zhang Yan used his qi to form a bridge. After crossing the cliff, he took out a few talismans and burned them. He mixed them into the water and made the people and horses submit. With the help of this talisman, everyone felt their steps become lighter. In just one day, they had passed through 12 winding ravines. Based on the speed of their footsteps. Now that they had arrived at Hanjing, it was definitely not an empty promise. The guard said in a low voice, "Wei Weiling specially ordered me to stay behind and secretly leave a copy of the letter and the appearance of these two people for Immortal Master Deng." Priest Deng's face darkened. He threw the letter and shouted, "Since this happened, why didn't you report to me earlier? Why did you make me wait for so long?" The guard felt wronged and pointed to the sky. He said with a trembling voice, "Immortal Master, as the saying goes, looking at the mountain will kill the horse. Immortal Master is in the sky. This lowly one was pursuing him on the ground. Although I saw him long ago, it was not easy to keep up with him. That's why I was late." Priest Deng resisted the urge to punch this person to death. He snorted, then rode on his eagle and chased after Han capital. But it was already too late. On the way to the capital. As expected, there was no trace of them. It was just as the guard had said, the caravan had already entered Han capital. At this moment, a vast human city appeared in front of him. As soon as he got close, a white-haired Taoist arrived in front of him on an artifact and reprimanded him without any trace of politeness. "Which sect are you from? Don't you know that you can't fly above Han capital?" He was not allowed to fly in Han capital. This was a rule set by the 3 sects, and Priest Deng naturally knew about it. However, he was irritated and did not pay attention to it. After being berated by the other party, he couldn't even talk back. He felt even more furious in his heart, but he held back his anger and cupped his hands. "Fellow Taoist, I was too rash." After apologizing a few more times and waiting for the other party's expression to clear up, he finally retreated. When he was a few dozen miles away, he was already filled with rage. The reason why he chose to attack at this moment was not without reason. After Madame Wang's husband died, the original Dao Palace talisman was useless and could no longer protect the caravan. This time, Madame Wang went to the Dao Palace to request for a new talisman, and this was a chance for him to attack. If Madame Wang was taken care of by his senior and junior brothers, it would be impossible for him to attack again. He gritted his teeth and said, "2 wild Taoists spoiled my plans, and now they want to leave. How can there be such a good thing in the world?" He waved his sleeves and angrily returned to his cave abode. When he arrived at the subaltar, he took out a shadow painting of the 2 people, formed a spell, and sent them to his subaltar. Then, he sneered, "No matter where you run to, I will find you." Lai Xian's sect was one of the 3 major sects of Middle Pillar State, and they had branches in every state, city, and county. Once the images were sent out, as long as the people in the branch saw it, they would know that it was the people the sect disciples wanted to capture, and they would definitely capture them. However, if the opponent was too strong or came from a major sect, they would have to report to the main altar and not act on their own. Priest Deng only thought that they were 2 wild Taoists from small sects, and he did not know that they came from Donghua continent, so he did not take it to heart. Otherwise, he would definitely do things according to the rules. At this moment, Zhang Yan had already bid farewell to Madame Wang, and with the fish drum True Spirit and Mountain River Child, he rushed to Middle Pillar State's screen. This was the only way to get to Kunyu. This mountain was located to the east of the Middle Pillar continent, and it also pierced the clouds. It was shaped like a wooden comb, and it divided the road into 2. It was impossible to pass through it from a high place, so the only way was to go through the belly of the mountain. Although there was no one to lead the way this time, before they parted, Madame Wang gave him a secret map. This map was passed down through the generations of the Wang family, and all the underground paths in the mountain were marked with red lines. The map not only covered the territory of the Kingdom of Song, but also the Kingdom of Qi and Kingdom of Wei. There were also a few secret paths that only the royal family knew about. This made Mountain River Child very surprised. Such a detailed map was impossible to complete even if a lot of manpower and resources were spent, and it would take hundreds of years. With this map in hand, it was enough to make a family flourish. This time, if Zhang Yan did not help Madame Wang greatly, and this woman could see that the two of them were not ordinary people, she would not have given them this item. The middle pillar state was vast, and even though Zhang Yan could fly fast, it still took him half a month. Just now, he found another path. Different from other paths that were buried deep in the mountains, before this path, there was a road that could allow 4 horses to run side by side. The stone road was very smooth, and at the end, there were rows of jade steps that led to the waist of the mountain. Zhang Yan had good eyesight, and standing at the foot of the mountain, he could see that there was an altar there, and there were a few tall and strong people who looked like strong men, holding up a big stick made of gold leaf. Under the memorial archway, there were banners with gold bells and colorful knots, jade ornaments, and copper rings. There were a few Taoists dressed in yellow Taoist robes standing there, and they were ringing bells, chanting spells, and chanting. The altar was filled with offerings, and behind it, there was a black wooden statue that was half the height of a human. Zhang Yan could see clearly that this was Lord Yi, whom he had seen before. Every time those merchants and travelers went over, they would kneel in front of the god statue, and after they paid their respects, they would go into the cave. Zhang Yan called out to a passing white-haired elder, and asked, "Sir, what is the use of this altar on the mountain?" That elder saw that he was wearing a Taoist robe and had an extraordinary bearing, and he didn't look like an ordinary person, so he answered honestly, "This Taoist must have wandered here, right? There are many demons and strange beasts in the belly of the mountain, and they usually hide in the mountains, but in recent years, they have become bolder, and there are even some that come out to hurt people. Thus, last month, the country king invited Lai Xian's sect to open an altar here, and people who pass by only need to buy a talisman, and they will be safe on their journey." Zhang Yan nodded his head, and said, "So that's how it is. Are those people who are kneeling in worship believers of Lai Xian's sect?" The elder seemed to have thought of something, and he sighed, and shook his head. "Not all of them are believers, but those few Taoists said that to pass this trial, one must kneel in worship of the god of that sect." Zhang Yan understood the situation here, and he thanked the elder, and walked up the mountain. Since there was a sect that was setting up an altar here to perform their rituals, he didn't have any intention to have a conflict with them. When he arrived in front of those few Taoists, he ordered Mountain River Child to hand over a box of jade beads. The Taoist opposite him opened it, and his face revealed a joyful expression. He bowed to Zhang Yan, and he moved to the side to make way. Zhang Yan returned the greeting, and just as he was about to go over, a Taoist with a long beard, who was wearing a pure yang scarf on his head, walked out and stopped him. He said, "This Taoist friend, originally, only believers of my sect can enter the mountain, but the two of you are considered to be from my sect, so I won't make things difficult for you. You just have to worship in front of this god statue, and I will let you pass." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows, and he said, "Taoist friend, those commoners are fine, but I have my own sect, so how can I worship the patriarch of another sect?" In the eyes of those commoners, Venerable Master Yi was a god. Even if there was no benefit in worshipping him, there was no harm in it. But in Zhang Yan's eyes, it was different. Cultivators only kneel in 3 ways: heaven, earth, and master. Putting aside the fact that Venerable Master Yi had yet to ascend, even if he became a true immortal, he would still be the patriarch of another sect, so what did it have to do with him? When the long-bearded Taoist heard this, he didn't think much of it. He sneered, and he said with a smile, "I see that Taoist friend isn't from one of the 3 big sects, right? To be able to worship my sect's patriarch is your good fortune. The patriarch of a small sect like yours doesn't have much ability, so it's fine if you don't kneel." Coldness flashed across Zhang Yan's eyes, and he said, "Your sect has insulted my sect with your words. If you don't take back your words, don't blame I for being rude. That long-bearded Taoist glared at him, and he said, "What, you still dare to make a move?" At this moment, a Taoist child hurried over, and he whispered a few words into the Taoist's ear. The Taoist's expression changed, and he looked at Zhang Yan up and down. He then took a step back, and he said, "I was wondering where this wild Taoist came from, to be so unruly and unreasonable. So it's a demon of the evil path. Men, capture him for me." He waved his horsetail whisk, and more than 20 strong men immediately surrounded him. In the Donghua continent, strongmen were just guards and attendants. But here, even the generals, commanders, and nobles, in order to extend their lives and increase their blessings, did not hesitate to spend money to invite people from the 3 major sects to open altars and cultivate themselves into strongmen. Thus, there were also many techniques passed down. The strong men in front of him were all nourished with secret medicines since they were young, and even if they met a mystic light realm cultivator, they could still fight. Apart from Zhang Yan, there were also the merchants and travelers that passed by the mountain. They were a group of bold people who dared to travel 1,000 miles. Seeing that something had happened, not only were they not afraid, but they even revealed expressions of watching a good show. Zhang Yan laughed coldly. He waved his sleeves, and a cloud of smoke flew out, instantly rolling the 20 strong men on the ground. Seeing this, the long-bearded Taoist was shocked. He didn't think that the Taoist in front of him would be so ferocious. He suddenly thought of something, and he rolled up his sleeves and ran over to pick up the statue behind the altar. He was about to use the power of the statue to cast a Taoist technique. Zhang Yan smiled coldly. He waved his sleeves, and there was a loud sound as a ray of water flashed by. When the onlookers looked over, they were all shocked. The area in front of them was already empty. Not only did the Taoist and the dozens of disciples from Lai Xian's sect disappear, even the stone altar was empty and had disappeared without a trace. Chapter 432. After Zhang Yan cleared the Xian sect's altar, he entered the tunnel. He found a square rock and sat down. Then, he brought out the long-bearded Taoist. It didn't take much effort for him to get the details of the situation. Only then did he know that he had become the person that the Xian sect's various altars wanted to capture. He didn't care about this at all. Even if there wasn't this matter, it wouldn't be easy for him to cross the altar today. At this moment, he suddenly felt the ground tremble. He looked to the side and saw a one-horned, thick and strong 5-colored fierce bull turning around the corner. Its mouth and nose made a sound. Seeing that there was someone here, its eyes revealed a fierce glint. With a roar, it moved its 4 hooves, lowered its head, aimed the horn on its head at the front and brazenly rushed over. The long-bearded Taoist was terrified. He wanted to escape, but his body was restrained and he couldn't move. He was so anxious that his forehead was sweating. He only said, "Run, run, this is a 5-colored earth bull." Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent. When the earth ox was about to charge in front of him, he casually stretched out his hand and grabbed the horn firmly. No matter how much strength the colossus exerted, it let out a low roar, and even the soil under its hooves turned over a layer, but in his hand, it was still unable to move even half a step forward. The long-bearded Taoist didn't have much experience. Seeing how brave Zhang Yan was, he was also shocked. Then, his whole body quivered. Only then did he know how powerful Zhang Yan was. Thinking of his own situation, he couldn't help but be afraid. He forced a smile and said, "Fellow Taoist, just now, that was just a misunderstanding. If you let me go, I will definitely not pursue this matter. Even if the sect pursues the signal, I can also think of a way to remove it." Zhang Yan didn't care about him at all. He tilted his head and took a few glances. He saw that the one-horned fierce bull's eyes were blood red and it was delirious. It was obvious that it was cursed. If it was a normal mountain spirit, it would have already fallen to the ground in front of him. How would it dare to take the initiative to charge at him? He turned the bull's head to the side. He saw that under its neck, there was a copper needle inserted deep into its hair. If one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't be able to find it. He thought about it and couldn't help but sneer. So that's how it was. What strange beast came out to do evil? This was obviously Lai Xian sect deliberately using these 5-colored earth bulls to hurt people. In order to take the opportunity to recruit believers, they used such a despicable method to deceive the world. How could they still be called a celestial sect? Zhang Yan glanced to the side. Looking at the statue in the arms of the long-bearded Taoist, he sneered in his heart, "Your disciple and grand-disciple are unfilial, don't tell me you are not at fault." Seeing the statue and the long-bearded Taoist holding the statue in his arms, he was smashed into pieces. He stretched out his sleeve, and with a "kacha" sound, the deity statue was smashed into pieces. The long-bearded Taoist looked at the wood powder in his hand and was stunned. His entire body trembled as he pointed at Zhang Yan and said in disbelief, You actually dared to shatter the ancestor's statue?" He looked like he had gone mad. His face turned red and he shouted. "This is the statue that the sect master gave to us. Anyone who sees this is like seeing the sect master. If you dare to attack us, you are disrespecting Lai Xian sect. Even if we have to go to heaven or hell, we will kill you." Zhang Yan laughed out loud and said, "Then I'll be waiting for you." He stood up and released his water element true light. He brought the long-bearded Taoist and the 5-colored earth bull in. Now that he was alone, he had the sword escape technique and the complete spirit contract technique. He could take that step at any time. He also had the star pivot flying palace. No matter how strong Lai Xian's sect was, what did he have to fear? He waved his hand again and kept the fish drum true spirit and mountain river child into his magic treasure. He rode on the sword light and flew away. This ray of light flew like lightning under the ground. When it encountered hard rocks, he didn't dodge at all. He just used the sword light to open the way. He only cared about rushing through. That was why he moved extremely fast. Just now, he saw the benefit of Madame Wang's secret map. The underground paths were so wide and complicated. If it was a normal person, even if they could recognize it, they would only know a few. If it was 1,000 miles away, they probably wouldn't be able to recognize it. Only such a big clan would have such a heritage. Although Mountain River Child knew the way, when he came here, his previous master was a Yuanying Jinren. He wasn't afraid of the extreme heavenly wind. Therefore, he went above the clouds and didn't go underground. Therefore, he couldn't do anything about how to go underground. However, after Zhang Yan walked through it once, the mountain river map would record it. If the disciples came here in the future, they wouldn't need to find the people of this continent to show them the way. At this moment, 3 Taoists in purple robes came to the foot of empty concealing screen. The 3 of them were dressed in the same color. They wore crane cloaks and Wang Yu crown. They held horsetail whisks in their hands and their bodies were clean. One of the Lai Xian order's subaltars was destroyed. It immediately alerted the elders of the sect. They ordered the 3 of them to come and investigate. At the same time, they wanted to eliminate any negative effects. The 3 of them looked for a while and gathered together again. One of them, who was slightly older, said, "Junior apprentice brothers, did you find anything?" One of the Taoists continued, "The altar was sealed by the elders of our sect. Even if we wanted to move it away, we wouldn't be able to do so. Yet, this person was able to sweep away the altar along with all the disciples so easily. His cultivation base must be extremely high." The older Taoist stroked his beard and pondered. He said, "Could he be from Jinling sect or Qingshi temple?" The other Taoist thought carefully and shook his head. He said, "I don't think so." The older Taoist said, "Junior apprentice brother, why do you make such a judgment?" The Taoist pointed behind him and said, "Senior apprentice brother, behind this empty concealing screen is the land of those scattered sections. Jinling sect has conflicts with them. If we go there to recruit believers, they will only be happy to see it happen. Why would they obstruct us? Besides, as long as Qingshi Temple doesn't enter the borders of Qi, they don't care about the outside world. Why would their disciples come to do such shady business?" In the pillar state of Zhong, the three sects, Lai Xian Order, Qingshi Temple, and Jin Ling sect, were the most powerful. Each of them occupied a country. Although they were wary of each other, fortunately, this continent was rich in resources. If it wasn't for the enmity between the disciples, there were rarely any conflicts. The older Taoist nodded slightly. He said, although what junior apprentice brother said makes sense, it's just speculation. When Elder Pang comes, we will tell him what we saw. The three of them waited for less than an hour. The older Taoist's body trembled. He said, Elder Pang is here. Quickly come and congratulate him. They quickly knelt down and said loudly, Disciple welcomes Elder Pang. May the elder live a long life. A Taoist riding a crane came from the clouds. Other than 2 boys and several disciples, there were 10 beautiful women. They held fans and stoves, struck bells and played flutes. Their figures and expressions were elegant and beautiful. Behind them, there were more than 100 strong men. They all stood on the flying raft. They held golden spears and iron hammers in their hands, and banners were hung with seals. When this group of people came, celestial music was heard. Spiritual qi surged and a strange fragrance filled the air. It was an extravagant scene. After Elder Pang landed on the cloud, 2 servant girls came up and smoothed the wrinkles on his clothes. At this moment, another female cultivator came up with a golden basin. He reached his hand into the basin and washed it. After wiping it clean with a soft towel, he turned to look at the 3 people kneeling by his feet. He said slowly, Tong Cheng, how's the matter I asked you to do? The older Taoist kowtowed. He didn't dare to get up. He lied there and said, my senior apprentice brother and I investigated and felt that this person isn't from Jinling sect or Qingshi sect. I don't know which sect he came from. He doesn't know the power of the divine sect. Just now, he has done such a thing. The patriarch will definitely punish this person. Elder Pang didn't say anything. He sat there and didn't say anything. The servant girls behind him fanned him. Tong Cheng and the other 2 Taoists didn't know what he was planning. They couldn't help but feel anxious. After a while, a flying letter came from the sky. It flew over in an instant and hovered in front of Elder Pang. He reached out and took it. He opened it and snorted. He said, just as I expected. He threw the letter in front of Tong Cheng and the other 2 and said, go take a look. Tong Cheng and the other 2 picked it up and looked at it together. They exclaimed, these 2 people came from other continents? Elder Pang squinted his eyes and said, these 2 people first appeared in the middle of the mountain path of Huayao Valley. This place is rarely visited and not many people know about it. East of this place is the River of Time, and beyond that is the Donghua continent. This continent is currently experiencing the demonic calamity. These days, many cultivators have come to my place. No one knows what these 2 people look like, so it's very likely that they came from here. Tong Cheng came to a realization. He said, Elder Pang is right. I'm afraid they are cultivators from other continents. Just now, they dare to be so unscrupulous. They think I don't know where they come from and can't catch them. Elder Pang sneered and said, how can we let them go so easily after destroying the Lai Xian sect's branch altar? Previously, he was not in a hurry to chase after them because he was afraid that they were disciples of Jinling sect and Qingshi Temple. If there was a conflict, there would be no end to it. He did not want to get involved in this mess. Therefore, he waited for the sect to find out the background of the 2 people before proceeding with the next step. Now that he had deduced the identity of the 2 people, he no longer had such scruples. He waved his horsetail whisk and said in a deep voice, where is Bai Kechuan? Among the row of disciples behind him, a cultivator in his 40s with a calm expression stood up. He stood in front of Elder Pang and said, Disciple Bai Kechuan is here. What orders do you have for me, honored master? Elder Pang threw a token and said, take my order and gather people from all the altars. Pass through Mount Shield and chase after these 2 people. Remember, make a big fuss and try to catch them alive. I want those unorthodox rogue cultivators to know the consequences of offending the Lai Xian sect. Bai Kechuan bowed his body and said with his head down, "Yes, disciple." Elder Pang said in a deep voice, "This person can gather qi to form a bridge and can even send hundreds of people over. Today, he also swept through our branch altar. If he did not rely on some magic treasure, his cultivation level is most likely the same as yours and has reached the core transformation realm. Be careful. If you can't do this, don't come back to see me." Bai Kechuan immediately agreed, but he did not think much of it in his heart. Over the years, because of the devil's calamity in Donghua continent, there were many cultivators who fled to the pillar state of China. He had met many of them. Those people's cultivation levels were high and low. Not to mention him, most of them did not have protective magic treasures on them. Usually, when he used his magic treasure, there was no way he could block it and most of them were turned into dust immediately. Over the past few days, at least a dozen people had died in his hands. Naturally, he was very confident. Why would he care about these two rogue cultivators who came out of nowhere? Chapter 433. Zhang Yan used 3 days and just now, he was out of the mountain valley and back to the surface. In front of him was a dirt road. He followed this road and after traveling 5 miles, he saw a horse and mule market with about 1,000 people. A fishy smell assailed his nostrils. He gathered his mana in his eyes and looked ahead. From afar, he saw more than 10 scattered settlements. The small ones had about 100 people and the big ones had about a few thousand people. Although this place was not as densely populated as the cities in the Kingdom of Song, and was not a prosperous place, he could still see several streams of spiritual energy rising from the ground. They were like long, straight smoke, and did not dissipate. It was obvious that there were cultivators staying here. Ordinary people were unable to see such a scene, and only cultivators like him were able to see it clearly. However, he had found out beforehand that these people weren't members of the Xian sect, but they were rogue cultivators who weren't willing to be restricted by the 3 sections. They formed a loose alliance with each other, and they were called the Zhenluo Alliance. This alliance was quite powerful and there were many cultivators in the alliance. If they were to work together, they would be able to fight against the 3 sections. The middle pillar continent was bounded by the hidden Screen Mountain. The east side was the land of Pingdong, where the 3 sects were located. It had a large population and was the essence of the continent. On the west side was the land of Pingxi. Although there were vast plains and vast mountains, the land was sparsely populated. The people lived by herding animals, fishing, and hunting. The 3 great sects had originally regarded it as a barren land and rarely came here. Therefore, it was occupied by those loose cultivators. Zhang Yan did not want to meet the few cultivators. He wanted to socialize with them, so he deliberately avoided them. After traveling 100 miles, he got on a cloud and stopped to summon Mountain River Child. After confirming the direction, he sped up and headed towards Kunyu. After another half a day, he was deep into the interior of the Middle Pillar continent. Looking down from the cloud, the land was boundless. The plains were lush with water and grass. Large herds of cows and horses galloped. Ice-blue lakes dotted the land like jewels. The scenery was magnificent and beautiful. However, at this moment, he felt that something was amiss. He stopped and quietly looked around. A look of astonishment appeared on his face. He made a hand sign and released the water elemental True Light. A ray of light spread out in front of him. He concentrated his energy on his eyes and searched inside, only to find that the long-bearded Taoist and the strong man who was trapped here a few days ago had disappeared. He took a closer look. He saw a ferocious-looking strange insect the size of a palm with several pairs of wings on its back wandering around. He couldn't help but say, "So it's you who's causing trouble here." This was the bloodline gold worm that he had captured that day. He had been trapped in the water element True Light for a long time. He had thought that he would have died in the water element True Light, but unexpectedly, he was still alive. Not only that, but it also devoured all the people he had thrown into the True Light. After knowing the truth, he was not in the mood to pay attention to it. Just as he was about to withdraw the water element true light, the golden bug seemed to sense something. It suddenly shook its wings and turned into a beam of golden light that flew out. It had been trapped for a long time, and now that it had escaped the cage, it immediately flew back and forth. It let out a squeaking sound, showing its excitement. Zhang Yan saw it flying happily and said with a smile, "Fine, since you've escaped today, it's heaven's will. I won't catch you again, you can go." He flicked his sleeve and was about to leave, but the golden bug suddenly squeaked and landed in front of him, then circled around him. Zhang Yan saw that the bug didn't have any evil intentions, so he said, "What else do you want?" The golden bug rushed at him again and actually spat out a thick drop of blood. It then floated in front of him without moving. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. This was the golden bug taking the initiative to recognize him as its master. He thought for a moment and thought to himself, although this bloodline gold insect was raised by the devil sect's Yugu Xia, it is still a very powerful flying insect. If I suddenly release it to fight an enemy, it might have a miraculous effect. I might as well keep it. This kind of good thing was delivered to his doorstep, so he naturally wouldn't refuse it. Without hesitation, he stretched out his finger and accepted the drop of blood. Previously, there were hundreds and thousands of golden bugs, but they were trapped in the water element true light for dozens of years. They couldn't eat flesh and blood, so they could only eat each other. Just now, there was only one left. However, it was also a blessing in disguise. Originally, the golden bug could only follow its instincts, but this one had unexpectedly developed a bit of intelligence. However, it hadn't eaten for a long time and was originally on the verge of death. Until a few days ago, when Zhang Yan threw more than 20 people into the water element true light, its life was saved and it was able to eat to its heart's content. Now, not only did its strength recover, even its appearance had changed slightly. After Zhang Yan received the blood, the golden bug let out a happy cry. It folded its wings and landed on his palm. Then, it curled up into a ball with its head and tail intertwined. It was unexpectedly motionless. Looking at the bug's appearance, Zhang Yan's heart skipped a beat. His eyes flickered slightly as he suddenly had a guess. He smiled and took out a green-skinned gourd. He opened the cork and put it in. Then, he put it away and didn't care about it anymore. He shook his sleeves and once again took up his sword and flew away, turning into a ray of light. However, he didn't realize that at this moment, in the sky, there was a small red cloud flying over. A young lady with 2 conches on her head and a bright red dress was hiding in it. She held an iron mirror in her hand and was looking back and forth. At this moment, she suddenly saw a ray of light flashing in the mirror. She couldn't help but let out a "ah." Then, she stared at it for a while and her expression couldn't help but tighten. She muttered, "Master said that these few days, we have to be careful of Lai Xian Order's disciples sneaking into Ping Shi. This person's Dao technique is really strange. Could it be that he is from Pingdong?" She thought for a while and formed a spell. The red cloud suddenly changed and turned into a flying boat. She stepped on it and with a shout, she activated her mana and chased after him. Even though Zhang Yan was flying, he still maintained a sense of vigilance and immediately noticed that someone was following him. At first, he didn't think much of it. He was using the sword escape technique and his speed was peerless. He thought that he would be able to shake off the person behind him in a moment. However, after traveling for a full hour, he saw that the person was still following him. He didn't know what the flying boat-shaped instrument was made of, but it was actually able to keep up with his sword light. He couldn't help but feel surprised. He was amazed, but he didn't know that the young lady was even more surprised than him. Her instrument was made by the Zhenluo Union. It was specially used to investigate information and send letters. It was a piece of cake for it to travel 10,000 miles in a day. Even if those Yuanyingzhenren didn't use an instrument, they wouldn't be able to catch up. She originally thought that she could catch up in a few breaths, but this Taoist in front of her actually used a ray of escaping light and she couldn't catch up even if she used her full strength. Ever since she started cultivating, she had never left Pingxi. Even though she heard the elders and cultivators from other continents talking about the flying sword art, she had never seen it before. Therefore, she didn't recognize that Zhang Yan was using the sword escape technique. She only thought that he was purely using the mysterious light to escape. How could she not be shocked? After flying for a while, her qi was running out. She quickly took out a medicinal pill from her pouch and swallowed it. She adjusted her breath and her spirit recovered. However, she still couldn't catch up to this person. She couldn't help but feel worried and thought, this person's escape technique is so powerful, but I can't stop him by myself. If I let him fly, I don't know what kind of trouble he will cause. I should ask the elders in the sect for help. She waved her hand and took out a flying talisman from her pouch. She chanted a spell and sent the talisman into the sky. In an instant, a ray of light flew to the top of the clouds and exploded in the sky. Even the scorching sun in the sky couldn't cover its brilliance. At this moment, 10,000 miles away, there were two cultivators from Zhenluo Union fishing by the lake. One of the young Taoists swung his fishing rod, and the waves flew up. He caught a fierce fish that was 10 meters long and had a mouth full of sharp teeth. The young Taoist laughed and said, "Taoist Ding, I won again." The Taoist at the side smiled bitterly and said, "Taoist Yang's skill is a level higher. I can't compare." The young Taoist smiled proudly and shook his fishing rod again, throwing the fierce fish down. He said, "Again." This person's surname was Yang, and his name was Bingqing. He was originally a cultivator from Donghua continent. He had been in Middle Pillar continent for dozens of years. In the past, he was a guest under Demon King Jiu Kuei. Later, because he offended Pingyuan sect, he thought he couldn't establish himself in Donghua continent anymore, so he came here. In the past, he obtained a secret book on the East Sea. After dozens of years of cultivation, he had reached the first level of core transformation realm and had some status in Zhenluo Union. Although he was an itinerant cultivator, he was often proud of being born in Donghua and looked down on the cultivators here. He thought that they only relied on the rare spiritual items in the continent to refine a few more magic treasures, which was why they had some skills. In terms of real skills and ability to fight in battle, no one in the same generation could compare to him. If he also had such rich cultivation items in Donghua continent, why would he have to hide here from thousands of miles away? Taoist Ding beside him seemed to have a lot on his mind. Seeing that the fish in his hand had left the hook again, he put down the fishing rod and said, "Taoist Yang, have you heard recently that Lai Xian's sect has set up an altar in front of Pingdong Valley Road, saying that they want to come here to preach? If they really come, how can we survive? We need to be careful." Yang Bingqing didn't care and said, "Taoist Ding, don't worry. Lai Xian's sect may be big, but they are people who are used to living a good life. Why would they come to this poor and remote place to suffer? I think it's most likely a rumor." Ding Taoist shook his head and said, "Rumors may not be without reason. It's never wrong to be more vigilant. Within a radius of 30,000 miles, the alliance is under our control. If anything happens, we will not be able to escape responsibility." Yang Bingqing felt disappointed and threw the fishing rod away. He said, Fine. Let's go patrol again today. What do you think?" Taoist Ding smiled and said, "Exactly." As the two were talking, their expressions suddenly changed. They looked up at the sky and saw the shining light. Yang Bingqing raised his eyebrows and said, "I think you are right." Taoist Ding suddenly stood up and said in a deep voice, looking at the light, "It should be from Lady Situ." Even she couldn't stop it. The person who came must be very skilled. The two of them looked at each other and didn't say anything more. They each took out their flying magic tools and rushed to the place where the signal light was. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 434. In the west side of Hidden Screen Mountain, spirit light flashed, and after a few explosions, several flying boats jumped out. Bai Kechuan stood with his hands behind his back and looked ahead. Behind him were more than 50 cultivators. They were all wearing embroidered robes and high boots. Among them, there were 5 who had the same cultivation as him, and they were all at the core formation realm. The remaining 40 or so were Mystic Light Realm cultivators. This force had taken all the branches of the Lai Xian sect in the country of Song. Bai Kechuan looked around and yelled, "Come, bring out the compass and find the whereabouts of those 2 wild Taoists." A middle-aged cultivator walked to a spacious area and took out an item. He took off the red cloth covering it, revealing a golden copper compass. He then lit a candle and sat down cross-legged, starting to calculate. However, in the blink of an eye, the black hair on his head had turned gray, and his appearance was haggard. With a thump, he collapsed to the ground. The copper spoon on the compass spun a few times and pointed towards the southwest. It was extremely difficult to deduce the foundation of a cultivator. He had only used this spell for a short while, and he had only roughly deduced the position, but this person's vitality had already been exhausted and his breathing was very weak. However, he still didn't close his eyes and stared at Bai Kechuan. Bai Kechuan walked in front of him and nodded his head in satisfaction. "Don't worry. Choose a descendant from your family to enter my religion to cultivate." After the man received this promise, he let out a long sigh. A gratified smile appeared on his face, and he closed his eyes without any reluctance to part with her. He closed his eyes and died. Bai Kechuan raised his hand and waved. "Come, take him away. After this matter is dealt with, bury him properly." At this moment, an altar lord suddenly said, "Senior Marshal Brother Bai, those 2 Taoists were a few days ahead of me. It won't be easy to catch up to them. What do you plan?" Bai Kechuan was full of confidence. How could he not be prepared for going deep into Pingxi? He looked behind him and said loudly, "Junior Marshal Brothers, don't worry." He said loudly, "Junior Brothers, there is no need to worry. This time, I have already asked for teacher's permission to use the earthly god statue here. Open the golden bridge of extradition and chase after those 2. Hearing this, everyone's expressions relaxed, no longer worried. The golden bridge of summoning was a teleportation technique of the sect. It required a statue of a deity that had been buried in the ground in advance as a support to draw the essence of the spiritual root from the vein of the earth. In the blink of an eye, it could send dozens of people thousands of miles away. However, in order to move the statue of the patriarch, one had to first pray with incense and perform a ritual. Even if this place wasn't within the Xian sect's world, they couldn't ignore it. Otherwise, it would be disrespectful to their ancestors. Thus, they all stopped and split up to make arrangements. At this time, the cultivators of Zhenluo Union who were stationed here had already noticed the commotion, but seeing that there were many Lai Xian sect disciples, they didn't dare to go forward and could only send a letter to ask for help. Bai Kechuan and the others didn't pay attention to them at all. It took them an hour. Just now, after completing the ritual, he arranged the flying raft and made a hand seal. Suddenly, an auspicious light rushed out from the ground. Dozens of people leaped into the sky in an arched arc. Then, they flew away with the light and disappeared without a trace in an instant. The rainbow flew 3,000 miles in an instant and landed again. Just now, this group of people appeared. Bai Kechuan called out a few times and ordered people to dig out the statue that was buried in the ground. Once this teleportation technique was used, this statue would no longer be of use. Thus, the spiritual light on it had already disappeared and it no longer looked like it originally did. The group of Lai Xian sect disciples wrapped the statue in a cloth and carefully placed it in a jade box. They were prepared to bring it back to build a temple and worship it with incense. After settling everything, Bai Kechuan once again used the same method and drove the golden rainbow bridge towards the southwest direction. In just a moment, he had used no less than 12 of the patriarch statues that were buried deep underground. This had already taken up more than half of what Lai Xian sect had set up. However, until now, they still hadn't caught up to Zhang Yan. Among the people that came this time, there was one person who saw him squandering without any worries and felt his heart ache. This person's name was Yu Xiaofang. The statues of the deities in Pingxi were personally buried by him and his esteemed master. It took no less than 300 years. Many of his fellow apprentices died in the process. The price they paid was not small. Putting that aside, each statue was carved from ebony wood that was more than 10,000 years old. This item could naturally be used as a divine weapon. Even though it was the size of a palm, it still required more than 60 core transformation cultivators to take turns to refine it. After 100 years of hard work, they finally made 18 statues and buried them in the ground of Pingxi. These arrangements were originally prepared to be of great use at a critical moment. However, he didn't expect Bai Kechuan to be so extravagant. He didn't even blink and used so much. No matter how rich Lai Xian's sect was, they couldn't afford such a waste. Moreover, this way, Zhenluo Union would definitely find out about their arrangements and it would be impossible for them to use this method in the future. However, he couldn't openly object and could only say in a muffled voice, "Senior Marshal Brother Bai, I'm afraid Zhenluo Union will notice our big movements and won't let us go." How could Bai Kechuan not see through his thoughts? He said rather forcefully, "I'm here to show them the power of Lai Xian's sect. If you're afraid, just go back." Yu Xiaofang looked at him and said with a trembling voice, "But if we continue to chase like this, when will we catch up? How many more statues do we need?" Bai Kechuan looked at him coldly and said, "This is Elder Pang's order. If this matter is delayed, can you bear the responsibility?" Hearing him say this, Yu Xiaofang's temper rose and he said, "These statues were personally arranged by my sect. How can you use them without restraint?" Bai Kechuan was infuriated. This was the first time he acted alone under Elder Pang's order. He didn't expect that there would be people who didn't care about discipline at this moment. Instantly, killing intent bloomed in his heart and he wondered if he should find an excuse to kill someone to establish his power. At this moment, someone suddenly said, "Senior Marshal Brother, look ahead." Bai Kechuan raised his head and looked ahead. He could faintly see a ray of light flashing past the horizon. Although he couldn't see the person's appearance, it was highly possible that it was the two wild Taoists who tore down the altar. He couldn't be bothered to tangle with Yu Xiaofang at the moment. He waved his hand and shouted, "Chase." He used the same trick again. He controlled the great light golden bridge again and leaped over the ray of light, landing in the wilderness in front of him. However, they had only arrived for a moment when the ray of light appeared in their field of vision. In another 10 breaths' time, it had already closed in. Bai Kechuan couldn't help but be shocked and thought, what kind of escape technique is this? How can it be so fast? However, he had already seen the person's appearance clearly. It was one of the two wild Taoists. He sneered and brought a few people to fly up and block in front of him. Zhang Yan just saw the shocking rainbow light pass over his head. However, before he knew what these people's intentions were, there was no reason for him to avoid it. At this moment, he suddenly saw these 50 people lying in front of him. They seemed to have bad intentions. He stopped and bowed, "Fellow Taoists, why are you blocking I's path?" Bai Kechuan sized him up and said coldly, "Let me ask you, were you the one who broke my Lai Xian sect's altar that day?" Zhang Yan's eyes flickered. So it was because of this matter. He didn't expect them to come so quickly. This Lai Xian sect was quite capable. He admitted, "That's right. That day, your disciple insulted I sect, so I had to teach him a lesson." Bai Kechuan's face darkened and shouted, "Then where are the few members of my sect that were captured by you?" Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, "Their corpses are long gone." Bai Kechuan couldn't help but be furious and said, "You demon, not only did you dare to kill my Lai Xian sect's disciples, you even destroyed their corpses. Even if you die 10,000 times, you won't be able to forgive your sins." At this moment, he saw that the surrounding people had already spread out and surrounded Zhang Yan. He calmed down and felt that the situation was under his control. He shouted, "Attack!" After Yang Bingqing and that Ding Daoist flew for thousands of miles, a shocking golden rainbow flew over and landed on the ground in an instant. This light looked like a bridge, and it even had the aura of a divine art. After all, he had been here for 30 years only now. He didn't know what technique it was, so he asked in shock, "Brother Ding, do you know which sect's technique this is? Why is there such a scene?" Ding Daoist, who was at the side, was a native. After taking a few looks, he frowned and thought for a moment. He said, "Looks like the Lai Xian sect's golden bridge of extradition." Yang Bingqing frowned. Was it really the Lai Xian sect's people who were playing tricks? He said in a deep voice, "This matter shouldn't be delayed, we need to quickly fetch Lady Situ." Ding Daoist agreed. Without hesitation, the two of them sped up and moved forward. At this moment, the signal light had already dispersed, but they had already identified the direction. After flying for less than 100 miles, they saw an exquisite red cloud that looked like a lip flying over. There was a lady standing on it, and it was Situ Rong whom they were looking for. The two of them hurried over. Yang Bingqing bowed and said, "Lady Situ, is it the Lai Xian sect's disciple in front?" Situ Rong didn't say much and waved, "Senior brothers, you will know after following me." After saying that, she turned and led the way in front. The two of them didn't think much and followed her. After a few miles, they saw Zhang Yan being surrounded by the Lai Xian sect's people. At first, Yang Bingqing's expression was calm, but when he saw Zhang Yan's appearance, he couldn't help but tremble. His mouth was also wide open, and his mind was in a mess. He almost shouted in his heart, "Why is this person here?" Almost no one in the Middle Pillar state knew about Zhang Yan, but Yang Bingqing was from the Donghua continent, so how could he not know? Back then, Zhang Yan fought against 100 people on the East Sea. He was someone who experienced it personally, so he had long seen how powerful this person was. When he hid in the Middle Pillar state, he had already heard that this person had become one of the top 10 disciples of the Qinsang school. This was already an existence that he couldn't reach. Now that he saw him, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. He grabbed Ding Daoist and said anxiously, "Go quickly. If we don't leave now, it will be too late." Ding Daoist was confused, but seeing that he was so anxious, he knew that there must be a reason, so he didn't resist and flew with him. Situ Rong saw that he suddenly left and couldn't help but be shocked. However, for safety reasons, she didn't dare to stay here alone, so she also followed. Yang Bingqing escaped 1,000 miles in one breath, and felt slightly relieved, so he slowed down his speed. Only then did Ding Daoist had the time to look, and he asked in confusion, "What do you mean?" "No matter how powerful the Lai Xian order is, we have." Yang Bingqing said with lingering fear, "I'm not worried about the Lai Xian order, I'm afraid that the Daoist mistook us as people of the Lai Xian order and killed us as well." Ding Daoist heard what he meant and said in disbelief, "Are you talking about that Daoist? How can he win all these Lai Xian order disciples alone?" Yang Bingqing shook his head, and he remembered that Zhang Yan swept around the East Sea with his sword, and no one could stop him. Even Demon King Jiu Kuei was defeated and left. He couldn't help but sigh, and said, "How do you know how powerful this person is?" "Under this person's sword, I dare to say that even if the Lai Xian order had twice as many people today, they would still be killed, not to mention that there are only 50 people in the Lai Xian order today." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for recommendation or monthly votes. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 435. Hearing Yang Bingqing's words, Daoist Ding's first reaction was disbelief. He shook his head, "From what I see, that person is only at the core transformation level. It's true that he has some skills, or else he wouldn't be here. How is it possible that he can kill the people from Lai Xian sect? Does Brother Yang know who the leader of Lai Xian sect is?" Yang Bingqing was surprised, "Who is it?" Daoist Ding stroked his beard and said slowly, "You haven't been to Middle Pillar State for long, so you don't know this person. He is the 5th disciple of Lai Xian sect's spiritual master Pang. His name is Bai Kechuan." This person has a talisman personally taught by spiritual master Pang. It's called the Sunken Lake Tablet. Once it is used, it can release 4 lights and 4 qi. He has never lost before, so he dares to enter Zhenluo Alliance's territory because he has some confidence. Yang Bingqing saw that Daoist Ding's words seemed to be mocking him for his lack of knowledge and couldn't help but feel displeased. However, he also knew that no one in Middle Pillar State had ascended, so they didn't place much importance on cultivation. They only believed in talismans, so it was normal to have such thoughts. Thus, he controlled his temper and said, "What Brother Ding said is common sense, but this person is indeed different. He is skilled in the art of killing with flying swords. Even without using talismans, he is still very powerful." Flying swords? Sword cultivator? Daoist Ding was shocked, his face turning pale. He said subconsciously, could he be a disciple of Shaoqing sect? Shaoqing sect was only separated from Middle Pillar State by the Time River. In the past 10,000 years, they had invaded Middle Pillar State several times. At this time, Middle Pillar State often needed to gather the power of the entire state. Just now, they fought against them, but each time, they suffered great losses. This caused a change in the sections 1,000 years ago, when Donghua State was at its peak. Qinsang School, under the leadership of sect master Qin Qinggang and his junior brother Zhui Yuming, suppressed the 8 demon tribes of North Darkstar State. Other than the demon ancestral court, only the snake, turtle, and carp tribes still had some strength left. Yuxiao School's power spread to the north of South Cliff State and the islands of South Sea. The Shaoqing sect was naturally unwilling to be outdone. In order to intimidate the Central Pillar continent, they sent over 60 disciples to kill their way here, and they even killed their way into the interior of empty concealing screen. At that time, all the sects of the Central Pillar State had joined forces and relied on the topography of the mountains. He lured most of them into a formation to fight, just now was barely able to force them back. This battle was especially tragic. The Shaoqing sect lost more than 30 disciples and more than 10 elders, all of whom were injured. The cultivators of the Middle Pillar State also suffered heavy casualties. Less than 10% of them survived. Only later did the Golden Soaring sect appear. Lai Xian sect, Qing Shi Guan, these 3 sects rose to power. Even so, in order to prevent the Shaoqing sect from attacking again, the 3 sects would send large amounts of cultivation materials to the Donghua continent every 60 years to help their disciples cultivate. Nurturing flying swords allowed the Shaoqing sect to regain its position as the #1 sect in just a few hundred years. When the 3 sects heard that a great calamity was about to befall the Donghua continent, they were initially nervous, afraid that the Shaoqing sect would seek refuge in the Middle Pillar continent. However, when he asked around, he realized that he had worried for nothing. The entire Shaoqing sect was not afraid of this great tribulation. Instead, they were eager to give it a try, preparing to have a good fight with the 6 great demon sections. They temporarily could not care about this place. This also allowed them to calm down and continue to enjoy themselves. When he heard that Zhang Yan was skilled in flying swords, Daoist Ding immediately thought of the Shaoqing sect. Yang Bingqing hurriedly explained, this person is not a Shaoqing disciple. He is a disciple of the Qinsang school. When Daoist Ding heard that he was not a Shaoqing disciple, he relaxed. Although he had heard of the Qinsang school, in his opinion, only the disciples of this sect could be called sword cultivators. In this world, only the disciples of this sect could be called sword cultivators. The rest were nothing to be afraid of. He glanced at Yang Bingqing and said, Daoist Yang, we are cultivators of the Zhenluo Alliance. Now that the Lai Xian sect has entered our territory, how can we avoid them? Lady Situ sent out a signal just now. I believe there will be senior and junior brothers from the Alliance rushing over soon. If they see us and not only do they not care about us, they even hide far away, what will they think? Yang Bingqing frowned and said, Daoist Ding, do you not believe my words? I'm not talking nonsense or afraid to advance. This person is really powerful. If he wants to kill us, our lives will be in danger. Situ Rong's eyes shone and she asked curiously, Daoist Yang, is this person really a sword cultivator? Yang Bingqing said seriously, I'm not lying. Situ Rong's expression actually showed some yearning as she muttered to herself, so that's the sword escape. No wonder he's so fast. In the past, I've only heard about how powerful sword cultivators are, but I've never seen it for myself. I'll have to go and take a look. Daoist Ding thought for a while and clasped his hands at Yang Bingqing. Daoist Ding, since you're afraid, then let me and Lady Situ go together. Daoist Ding can stay here. Situ Rong saw Yang Bingqing's expression change slightly and smiled sweetly. She pointed at her feet and said, Daoist Yang, even if this person wants to kill us, it's fine. I have this rouge cloud flying technique, even flying swords won't be able to catch up. If you're still worried, you can just hide far away. Plus, we can't ignore this matter. If the elders of the Alliance ask about this, it won't be good for us to say we don't know anything. Don't you think so? Yang Bingqing thought about it and felt that it was possible with the help of this magic treasure. He sighed and said, okay, I'll go back with you too. On the other side, as Bai Kechuan gave the order, the 5 core formation cultivators all took action. They took out their magic treasures and threw them at Zhang Yan. Even the profound light realm cultivators took action. Their magic treasures flashed chaotically and energy surged like waves. They originally thought that this strike would surely cause Zhang Yan to have nowhere to run and would be able to deal with him in one go. But unexpectedly, when those tens of magic treasures had just descended and hadn't even arrived in front of him, they suddenly heard the sound of a surging river, an array of water swept out of thin air. It was like jade waves surging, a great river surging, and its imposing manner was boundless. Now that Zhang Yan's great mystery 5 elemental true technique had been completed, the power of the 5 elemental true light was even stronger than before. The magic treasures of the profound light realm cultivators were swept away by the wave. The magic treasures of the 5 core formation cultivators only lasted for a short while. After struggling a bit, they fell into the wave and lost their connection with them. When the water element true light disappeared, they saw Zhang Yan standing in the air with his hands behind his back. His robe fluttered in the wind and his expression didn't change at all. All the magic treasures that came at him were swept away. This scene couldn't help but cause the disciples of the celestial sect to panic. They unconsciously retreated, and the encirclement was immediately broken. Zhang Yan saw that they had suddenly become abnormally flustered, and their expressions were even more panicked. He could not help but feel a little surprised. When he fought against people in the Donghua continent, even if his opponents were no match for him, he had never seen any cultivator act so unbearably in the beginning. However, he didn't know that there was a reason for this. The sects in the Middle Pillar state had fought with the Shaoqing sect several times. No matter how much progress they made in their techniques, they were not a match for the Shaoqing sect. However, with a magic treasure in hand, it was different. Even if a disciple with low cultivation obtained a powerful magic treasure, he could immediately suppress his peers. Also, the Middle Pillar state had countless spirit treasures, and there was no lack of materials to forge magic treasures. The Butian Pavilion, one of the top 10 sects in the East Flower continent, often had disciples come here to practice forging. Therefore, as long as the disciples of the 3 sects had a bit of cultivation, almost all of them had magic treasures in hand. They were much more extravagant than the East Flower continent. It could be said that most of the battle power of the cultivators in this continent was tied to their magic treasures. Now that it was suddenly broken by Zhang Yan, how could they still have the will to fight? They immediately panicked. Among everyone present, only Bai Kechuan remained calm. Although he didn't know what technique Zhang Yan used, he was confident that he had the heavy lotus tablet in hand and the treasured clothing to protect him, so there was no need for him to be afraid. Seeing that everyone was in a mess, he cursed under his breath. Just as he was about to scold them, he saw Zhang Yan point out with his hand, and a sharp, cold light flew towards him. He didn't expect this to happen. By the time he realized the flying sword, it was already too late. He felt an itch in his throat, and when he reached out to touch it, he grabbed a handful of blood. He was instantly shocked. If it wasn't for the treasured clothing, his head would have been separated from his body. He couldn't help but cry out, "You're a swordsman." Zhang Yan was also surprised. That sword light just now was just to test the opponent, and it was released casually. He didn't plan on hurting the opponent, and he didn't expect the person to actually stand there without dodging. He couldn't help but shake his head. When fighting against the enemy, how could one stand still? If there was a huge difference in cultivation, then so be it. But if their cultivation was similar, wouldn't this be letting the opponent attack? Even if Zhang Yan had the complete soul contract technique and the treasured clothing to protect him, when they fought, he would dodge if he could, and rarely took the attack head-on. Just now, if it wasn't one sword, but 16 sword lights, this person would have been killed under the sword. When Bai Kechuan saw that Zhang Yan was a swordsman, he felt a chill in his heart. How would he dare to stand so close to him? He hurriedly retreated a few dozen feet. He didn't dare to be careless anymore. He first circulated his mana, and activated the treasured light protecting his body to the limit. Then, he shook his sleeve and said, "Rise." He threw the heavy lotus tablet into the air. As soon as this item appeared, it sprinkled golden flowers in the air, as if a human figure emerged from it. Although this person's face was difficult to distinguish, one could vaguely see that it was somewhat similar to Venerable Iya. This human figure suddenly opened its eyes, releasing green, purple, red, and blue rays of light, like long snakes dancing. They came down to kill. When the 50 cultivators at the side saw this item, their expressions changed greatly, and they all fled in all directions. Wherever the four-colored light swept, wind, fire, water, and lightning would erupt. The void shook, and the sound of it echoed endlessly. Bai Kechuan's expression showed that he was straining, and he seemed to be unable to completely control this sword treasure. As the lightning swept, a disciple couldn't dodge in time, and the light hit him. He immediately cried out in pain, and his body was immediately smashed into pieces. Zhang Yan looked at the incoming momentum and smiled slightly. He said, "This has some skill." He didn't panic, and the sword light shot out like a lightning arrow. He immediately left the light behind him, and it turned into a sharp light that went straight for Bai Kechuan's face. Bai Kechuan still didn't dodge. When Zhang Yan's sword landed on the treasured light protecting his body, the light trembled, but he was unharmed. He gritted his teeth, and the four-colored light turned around, sweeping toward Zhang Yan again. Zhang Yan shook his head. The sword light flashed, and he dodged the light. After a few flashes, he was more than 1,000 feet away. He stood in the clouds and said indifferently, "If this is all you have, then there's no need to fight anymore. I will take you away right now." Chapter 436. P.S. Although Zhang Yan wasn't bragging about wanting to subdue Bai Kechuan, it wasn't that easy. He said this because he saw that the treasured clothing on Bai Kechuan's body required a lot of mana to be used. Therefore, he purposely provoked Bai Kechuan with words to make him reveal some flaws. Hearing this, Bai Kechuan was also filled with anger. Ever since he started cultivating, when had he ever suffered such a loss? He desperately drove the four-colored light back and forth. The light flickered ceaselessly, stirring and washing, sprinkling down like pouring water. However, Zhang Yan's sword light was extremely fast, and before the wind, fire, water, and lightning attacks could reach him, he would already be on the other side. Although the surrounding disciples could see that something was wrong, even if they had treasures, they couldn't interfere with the battle between the two. Otherwise, if they weren't careful, they would be affected by the heavy lotus plate. Furthermore, most of them were empty-handed, so they could only watch from the side. Bai Kechuan saw that no matter how much power he used, the four-colored light couldn't land on Zhang Yan's body. He was shocked and afraid, knowing that he would be in trouble if this continued. When he fought with his enemies, he was always successful. He only needed to use the heavy lotus plate to take down his opponent, but he had never been in such a predicament. His treasures couldn't hit his opponent at all, so how could he win? Zhang Yan saw that he was still defending well, so he didn't want to waste time with him. He smiled and said, "Let me take care of the spectators first, then I'll join you." He pressed the sword pellet down, and 10 bright sword lights split out. He pointed his finger, and they circled around Bai Kechuan's body. Although they didn't land, they were threatening. After that, he spread out the sword gleam and went far into the sky. He chased behind a disciple of the Lai Xian sect and cast the water element true light downwards. A person came in. Then, the sword gleam leaped and flashed to the other side. It was the same. In just a few breaths of time, he had already captured 6 people in succession. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before he would be able to clean up all of the people here. The Mystic Light Realm disciples didn't even have the ability to fight back against him. They all ran away and screamed, "Senior Martial Brother Bai, save us." Bai Kechuan's face was livid. He had never expected that Zhang Yan would completely ignore him and turn to pick on his fellow disciples. There were a few times when he couldn't help but want to attack, but when he saw the faintly flashing sword pellets around him, he restrained himself. After experiencing that sword strike from before, he already knew that if he dared to act rashly and be careless, then that flying sword that came out of nowhere would be able to take his head. So when facing his fellow disciples being slaughtered, he actually hardened his heart and forcefully endured it, and he didn't lend a hand in the slightest. In reality, Zhang Yan's 10 light-splitting sword rays were not as powerful as he had imagined. Although the light-splitting separation and reunion technique was powerful, it required the swordsman to stand in one place and use his mind to control it. Right now, he was just taking advantage of the fact that he didn't know the ins and outs of the situation and was only putting on an act. As expected, the latter was intimidated. Bai Kechuan kept plotting countermeasures in his heart. After a while, he suddenly raised his head, looked at one place, and said in a deep voice, "5 junior brothers, are you still not going to attack? If we wait for this person to wipe out all the martial nephews, then it will be your turn." The 5 core formation cultivators who followed him were standing together at this time. They were the altar masters of the various altars. Because their cultivation levels were higher, Zhang Yan didn't attack them first. When Zhang Yan attacked, these 5 people unconsciously leaned together. With their fellow disciples taking care of each other, after the initial panic, they also calmed down a little. To be able to reach such a position in the Lai Xian sect, although Zhang Yan had taken away their prized treasures just now, how could they only have one treasure with them? It was just that they saw that Zhang Yan's technique was strange, so they had some selfish motives. They wanted to keep their treasures to protect themselves and didn't want to lose them for no reason. They weren't stupid, it was just that they couldn't see clearly. Now that Bai Kechuan said this, their hearts trembled, and they immediately understood the situation in front of them. They looked at each other a few times, and one of them said, "Senior Brother Bai is right. This is Zhenluo Union's territory, there is no way out for us. If we don't kill this person now, do you think we can go back alive?" Bai Kechuan said loudly, "That's right, we can only get out of this predicament if we work together." Yu Xiaofang, who had a disagreement with him before, was also among them, but he didn't have a good expression. At this moment, he couldn't help but mock, "Bai Kechuan, where did your prestige just now go? If it wasn't for you, how would we end up like this? After we return, I will definitely report what happened today to the sect master." Bai Kechuan snorted and said, "Yu Xiaofang, it won't be too late to say this after you leave." Yu Xiaofang coldly replied, "Then you don't have to worry about it, great immortal Master Bai." Bai Kechuan snorted, but he didn't say anything else. Yu Xiaofang looked at the battle in front of him and said in a low voice, "This Daoist's Dao technique is strange, it seems to be able to take people's magic treasures. We can't take out our magic treasures at the same time to avoid repeating the same mistake. When we fight later, 2 of us will attack, 2 of us will look after him, and 1 of us will protect him from the side. If our magic power isn't enough, then 2 of us will go up. What do you guys think?" The other 4 saw that although his arrangement was simple, they couldn't think of a better way to deal with such a strong enemy in such a short time, so they all said, "We'll do as Senior Brother Yu says." The 5 of them roughly discussed and decided on how to cooperate with each other. Before this, they had never fought with a cultivator like Zhang Yan who didn't rely on magic treasures, so they suffered a loss. After they gained some experience, they would naturally change the way they fought, so they wouldn't be so embarrassed the next time they fought. However, the premise was that they could return alive from this battle. When Zhang Yan and the Lai Xian sect disciples fought, Yang Bingqing, Situ Rong, and the other two had already returned. They hid far away and watched the battle. At this moment, the three of them had different expressions. Yang Bingqing's face couldn't help but twitch. Back then on the East Sea, he also saw this scene. More than 100 people went up to attack one person, but in the end, they were defeated by this person. Thinking about it now, he could still feel the cold killing intent. Situ Rong's beautiful eyes lit up, and she couldn't take her eyes off it. Even though it was the first time she had seen a sword cultivator fight, she could still feel the carefree feeling of the sword lights flying around. She wanted nothing more than to have a sword pellet in her hand so that she could practice it properly. However, Ding Daoist's face was solemn. He frowned and didn't say a word. Zhang Yan didn't spend much effort and wiped out the more than 40 Xian light sect disciples. He flicked his sleeves, turned the sword light around, and turned back to fight the 5 core formation cultivators. Seeing this, Yu Xiaofang shouted, "Senior brothers, what are you waiting for? Quickly attack." Immediately, 2 people took out their magic treasures. In an instant, 2 completely red, burning with raging flames, and 3 feet high escape pillars fell down. Other than the magic treasures of the Lai Xian sect that were passed down by their own sect, the rest were all given by the sect, so they were more or less the same. Seeing that they didn't attack at the same time like before, Zhang Yan also smiled. He shook his shoulder, and the mysterious yellow dragon capturing hand jumped out of his head. He reached out and grabbed the 2 magic treasures in his palm. After this Dao technique was nourished by his true seal's spiritual essence, its power had also risen steadily. If it was in the past, it would have been difficult to defend against a transcendent artifact, let alone capture it. But now, it was a piece of cake. The 2 people who took out their magic treasures were shocked when they saw this, and they hurriedly used hand seals to take back their magic treasures. Yu Xiaofang, who was behind them, knew that the situation was bad, and he shouted, "Quickly help these 2 Dao brothers." He and the other Daoist flicked their sleeves and also took out the magic treasures in their hands. They attacked Zhang Yan, hoping to help their fellow sect members. Who knew that the moment their magic treasures left their hands, Zhang Yan laughed loudly, opened his sleeves, and shook them forward. In an instant, boundless waves surged out from below him, and the 2 magic treasures were swallowed by the waves before they could even get close. Then, with a rush, it swept over. Yu Xiaofang and the other 3 had no way to dodge, and in the blink of an eye, they all fell into the water curtain. When Zhang Yan turned around with his hands behind his back, his expression was as calm as an ancient well. The water light behind him surged backward, and like a tired bird returning to the forest, it slowly entered his body. At this moment, other than Bai Kechuan, there was no one else in the field. Bai Kechuan's hands and feet turned cold, and he trembled all over. Daoist Ding looked at the tall figure in the field from afar and couldn't help but ask, "Dao brother Yang, which sect do you think this person is from?" Yang Bingqing said in a deep voice, "Qinsang school." Daoist Ding cupped his hands and said, "Although I have heard a little about this sect, I wonder how it compares to Shaoqing sect." Yang Bingqing thought about it and said, "Donghua continent has 10 Xianmen sects, and among them, 3 are the most powerful. Shaoqing sect is only one of them, and this Qinsang school is one of them. Its power is no weaker than Shaoqing, and this person's surname is Zhang Yan, and he is one of the top 10 disciples in the sect." Seeing the inquisitive look in Daoist Ding's eyes, he explained, "The top 10 disciples of Qinsang school are almost all under Daoist Dongtian." Yang Bingqing actually didn't know the real background of Zhang Yan. He only said this to cover up his cowardly action of hiding when he saw him just now. But under normal circumstances, his assumption was not wrong, and it was not an exaggeration. Hearing that Zhang Yan's background was so extraordinary, Daoist Ding couldn't help but gasp. According to Yang Bingqing, this person's position in the sect was not low, so why did he come here? Was it like Shaoqing sect, to rob the spiritual items produced in the Middle Pillar continent? He frowned deeply, sighed, and said, Lai Xian sect, Qinsang school, it's really troubled times. He looked left and right, and said in a deep voice, this matter cannot be ignored, we must report it to the elders in the alliance. Yang Bingqing didn't mind, but at this moment, his expression suddenly changed. Just now, he inadvertently glanced over, and it seemed that Zhang Yan was intentionally or unintentionally looking at him. His heart suddenly tightened, and a layer of fine sweat also appeared on his forehead, and he said in a low voice, Brother, we should leave. Daoist Ding looked at the scene, and saw that in less than a quarter of an hour, Zhang Yan had already wiped out all the people on the periphery, leaving only one person. But he didn't think that this disciple of Lai Xian's sect could win, and it was only a matter of time before he was defeated, so he said, it's time to leave. He thought that if he were in the same place, he would definitely kill everyone here, so that Lai Xian's sect wouldn't find out. At this moment, he could take advantage of the fact that the other party had no time to care, and leave. If he was a little later, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to escape. Latest update, please bookmark. Chapter 437. Although Bai Kechuan's experience in fighting was not as different as Zhang Yan's, it was still very far. However, he was not very courageous. After being forced back by the 10 light-splitting sword shadows, he did not dare to take a step forward for the sake of his own life. However, he also knew that this was not the way to go on. His protective clothing required mana to protect his body at all times. There was no need for Zhang Yan to do anything. When his mana was exhausted, it would be the time for him to die. He originally wanted to use the heavy leaf plate to repel the 10 sword gleams. However, the 4-colored pillar of qi kept crashing downwards. Although he was able to knock it away every time, the sword gleams only made a turn when they reached the periphery before returning back. There was no way to get rid of it. Just as he was panicking, he glanced to the side and saw that Zhang Yan had already wiped out his fellow sect members. At this moment, Zhang Yan had turned around and was heading towards him. He could not help but be frightened. How would he dare to let Zhang Yan get close? He immediately started a spell and the heavy leaf plate forced out rays of spiritual light. In an instant, it became bigger. In an instant, the 4 qi merged into one. A rippling wave of light fell like a pillar. However, this time, it did not attack Zhang Yan. Instead, it covered him. With the protection of this treasure, he calmed down a little. He looked at Zhang Yan and lowered his posture. He forced out a smile and said, This Taoist, today's matter was originally a misunderstanding. Now that you have eliminated my fellow sect members, you must have vented some of your anger. How about this? These treasures can be considered as an apology. Let's call a truce. What do you think? Zhang Yan saw that he was using all his strength to defend himself, so he did not come over. He just stood on the clouds with his hands behind his back and said calmly, Today you came to capture me. If I let you go just like that, wouldn't it seem like I am too easy to bully? Ever since Bai Kechuan started cultivating, everything had been smooth sailing. When had he ever been so humble? Hearing those words, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed and annoyed. He clenched his fists and scolded, You Taoist, don't push your luck. I'm a disciple of Lai Xian's sect. My master, Peng Yuzhong, is a Yuanying Jinren. If you capture me, my master and the elders of the sect will not let this matter rest. Zhang Yan could tell that he was putting on a strong front, but he was cowardly at heart. He smiled and said, Now that you're in front of me, even if your master's cultivation was 10 times higher, what can he do to me? Bai Kechuan's breathing stopped. He was originally a person with a fickle personality. Thinking of the current situation, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a bit of panic. However, his chest was filled with hostility, and he refused to lower his head. He said sternly, Do you think you can win against me? Bai Kechuan bit the tip of his tongue. He raised his head and spat out a mouthful of blood, which immediately stained the sinking lotus tablet. With the aid of this mouthful of blood essence, the tablet suddenly trembled and released several tens of brilliant, colorful flames. Then, it grew to a height of 100 feet, and the four-colored light swirled before dispersing before descending again. However, this time, it was several times more powerful than it was just now. Zhang Yan smirked and said, "Although this magical treasure of yours does have some tricks up its sleeves. But in I's opinion, it's not difficult to break it." He didn't seem to make any movements, but with a slight shake of his shoulder, a misty green light rose behind him. The green light was boundless and full of vitality. As it rose, it collided with the four-colored light. There was a loud noise. Streams of light scattered in the air. Water, fire, wind, and thunder were swept away at the same time. The green brilliance was cut off in an instant. Bai Kechuan saw that he was able to take on his magical weapon head-on and could not help but reveal an expression of joy. He thought to himself, "What a reckless person. If you wanted to avoid it, I would not have been able to do anything to you. But since you came in yourself, I will let you see the power of my master's magical weapon." However, he didn't get to be happy for long before his expression gradually changed. Although the four-colored light fell down like hail, no matter how he exerted his strength, it was unable to disperse the green brilliance. On the other hand, it was like the grass on the plains, growing again when it was cut off, growing again when it was cut off. It seemed to be endless and grew without end. Zhang Yan lightly smiled. Although Bai Kechuan was full of vigor and seemed to have the upper hand, he could not last for long. Once this round of attacks was over, he could only wait for death. Although this sunken leaf tablet was extremely formidable, its might was determined by the strength of the person holding it. In less than 10 breaths of time, Bai Kechuan felt a wave of exhaustion assault him. When he saw his magical treasure was unable to do anything to Zhang Yan, his fighting spirit immediately suffered a heavy blow, and despair couldn't help but arise in his heart. He couldn't help but open his mouth to beg for mercy. But this time, Zhang Yan paid no attention to him and acted as if he didn't hear him. As this went on, Zhang Yan gradually gained the upper hand, and the wood element true light became more and more exuberant as it gradually charged upwards. Not long after, the light abruptly charged upwards and collided with the sunken leaf tablet. A loud bang resounded out as the tablet was knocked flying, and the four-colored light dispersed in an instant. Bai Kechuan seemed as if he'd suffered a heavy blow, and his entire body trembled before he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood, and he held his chest as he retreated in panic. Zhang Yan shouted out with a clear voice as he flicked his sleeve, sending out a strand of water element true light. With a sweep, it swept Bai Kechuan into it, and then he casually stretched out his hand to summon the sunken leaf tablet. When he placed it before him to take a look, he noticed that it was actually a profound artifact, and he couldn't help but sigh. This magical treasure is strange, but this person's strength is insufficient and is unable to fully utilize its profundities. With a flip of his palm, he put away the magical treasure, and then his gaze swept downwards. He pondered for a moment before spreading out his sword light and flashing swiftly towards the east. In the next moment, he saw 3 silhouettes flying hastily in front of him. Yang Bingqing suddenly sensed something, and he turned his head to take a look behind him. He couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh, and said, "Fellow Ding, there's no need to go any further. You can't escape." Hearing that, Priest Ding and Situ Rong also took a look behind them, and their faces revealed a shocked expression. After looking at each other, they stopped one after another. They also understood that this place was spacious, and there was no one from the alliance to receive them. As a sword cultivator, it was extremely easy for the other party to catch up with them. Rather than losing face, it was better to stop and have a good talk with him. If he really wanted to kill them, then it wouldn't be too late to fight then. They were originally on guard, but unexpectedly, when Zhang Yan arrived in front of the 3 of them, he wasn't as aggressive as they had imagined. Instead, he bowed and said politely, "May I ask where you 3 fellow Taoists are from?" Priest Ding was startled. Seeing that Yang Bingqing and Situ Rong didn't reply, he went forward to return the greeting, and said, "Fellow Taoists, greetings. We are cultivators from the Zhenluo Alliance, and because the Lai Xian sect entered our territory for no reason, we came to investigate. Just now, seeing that fellow Daoist has displayed his divine might and captured all of these people, we were afraid that if we showed ourselves rashly, we might incur fellow Daoists' displeasure, so we didn't come to greet you. Please don't blame us. Zhang Yan revealed a playful expression, and said, from what fellow Daoist said, could it be that the relationship between your alliance and the Lai Xian sect isn't good? Priest Ding originally couldn't directly answer this question, but in order to gain Zhang Yan's trust, he replied with a straight face, that's right. The disciples of the Lai Xian sect have always been overbearing and arrogant, and the disciples of my alliance have always hated them. Fellow Daoist must have experienced it. Zhang Yan stretched out his hand, and a ray of light flowed out. Bai Kechuan rolled out, and he said, I was just thinking about how to deal with this person. Since your alliance has enmity with this sect, then I'll let your alliance deal with him. What do you think? Priest Ding was startled, and his expression turned ugly. This Bai Kechuan was a hot potato, and if he accepted it, it would be extremely inappropriate. However, if he didn't accept it, what he said just now would be for nothing, and it might even make the other party suspicious. He hesitated for a while, and in the end, he clenched his teeth, and said, all right, this person will be dealt with by us. He raised his hand, and a ray of Dan Sha was released, and he took the unconscious Bai Kechuan over. Seeing that he had taken Bai Kechuan, Zhang Yan first gave Yang Bingqing a meaningful glance, and then he bowed, since this matter is settled, then I shall take my leave. The three of you, we may meet again in the future. He turned his sword light and left, and after a few breaths, he was gone. Priest Ding looked at Bai Kechuan in his hand, and he felt extremely depressed, and his face showed some worry. Yang Bingqing sighed, this is a plan to divert the trouble. How could Priest Ding not see it? After taking this person down, how could the Lai Xian sect let it go? It was really hard to guess how things would end up, but just now, how would he dare to reject them? Situ Rong looked at Bai Kechuan a few times, and she said excitedly, what are you two afraid of? From what I see, this is a good thing. This Bai Kechuan trespassed into our territory, and now that we have him in our hands, when we return to the alliance, how can we not be credited? Priest Ding wasn't as optimistic as her, and he shook his head, this Bai Kechuan's identity is different, he is a disciple of the Lai Xian sect's altar, and there is no benefit in making a big deal out of this. If the elders have the intention to keep the peace, it is possible that they will send him back, and then punish us. Situ Rong was stunned, and she said, will that be the case? Yang Bingqing sighed, although the land of Pingxi is not as prosperous as Pingdong, it is still considered comfortable. Which elder would be willing to become enemies with the Lai Xian sect? If they had done something earlier, how could they let them bully us all the way to our territory without doing anything? Yang Bingqing's eyes flickered, and he said, I have a way to avoid this disaster, but it depends on whether Brother Ding and Lady Situ dare to do it. Priest Ding looked over, and his eyes were filled with anticipation, and he said, Brother, please speak. Yang Bingqing said softly, you just have to kill this Bai Kechuan. Priest Ding was stunned for a while, as long as he killed this person, it would be impossible for the elders in the alliance to reconcile the two factions. By then, they naturally wouldn't fall out with them for a dead person, and instead, they would reward them greatly. His heart immediately churned, and he was a little hesitant. Situ Rong saw it clearly, and she said, Senior Brother Ding, this Bai Kechuan trespassed into the territory that you and Senior Brother Yang are guarding. Capturing this person is also the responsibility of the two of you, and you are in the right. If you accidentally kill him, no one in the alliance can blame you. Moreover, little sister is here, what are you afraid of? Her words immediately made Priest Ding make up his mind, not because of what she said, but because Situ Rong had some background in the alliance, and she was willing to stand with them, so this matter would be more responsible. He sighed, and he said, this is the only way. As soon as he said this, Yang Bingqing stretched out his hand, and a black and white sword chi flew out, and cut off Bai Kechuan's head. After Zhang Yan said goodbye to the three, he didn't care where they were going to cut off Bai Kechuan's head. He just flew southwest according to the direction that Mountain River Child pointed out, and after flying for another month, he saw a dark blue color in the sky. Looking closely, it was actually a floating continent in the sky, and it was unknown how big it was. This was the Kunyu that sect leader Qin had mentioned. After looking a few times, he pulled out his sword, turned into a rainbow light, and entered the clouds, and went straight to this continent. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me, and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 438. Zhang Yan used the technique to travel. The sword light shone brightly as he traveled for tens of miles. He passed through a swirling cyclone and rode above the sea of clouds until the sky was clear and a bright sun shone down from above. Just now, he was able to see the true appearance of this majestic continent in the clouds. He looked down from the sky and saw that the continent was connected to each other, the mountain ridges were complete and the chi of the earth was flourishing. In the far north, there was a winding mountain ridge that extended into the sky and he couldn't see the end of it. It was like an angry python was swimming and rolling under the veins of the earth. Near the south, the scenery was also beautiful. Deep valleys were shrouded in fog, the trees were lush and old vines were like hanging curtains, the green barrier was like a green screen, it was clear for thousands of years, there were thousands of waterfalls and thousands of streams, the torrents were like roars, rushing very fast. At this moment, his sleeve shook slightly and the true spirit of the fish drum came out. It looked up and a divine light shot out from its eyes. It then pointed at a mountain peak in front and said, "Nephew Zhang, this mountain is where the veins of the earth converge, it is also connected to the sky and the earth, it is an excellent place to gather qi." Zhang Yan looked over and saw that the shape of this mountain was different from the others, it was like a turtle looking up at the sky, its head in the clouds, its tail in the water, the mountain path was like a snake, he praised, "It is indeed a good place." He shook his sleeve and rode the wind forward. After walking for the time it took for an incense to burn, he suddenly felt something was wrong. The mountains and rivers were not far away, but it looked like it was right in front of him. However, no matter how he walked, he couldn't get any closer. After thinking for a while, he knew that there was a forbidden formation blocking him. However, this formation wasn't a killing formation, nor was it a maze formation, it wasn't used to trap enemies, if he turned around and left now, he would be able to return safely. Zhang Yan found out from Mountain River Child that when he passed by this place with the previous master, he couldn't enter. Because he was worried that it was the location of someone else's sect, he didn't investigate further. He thought to himself, it seems like this place has an owner. He was thinking about how to enter, his eyes darting back and forth. Suddenly, his expression changed as he felt that the landscape was somewhat familiar. As soon as he thought of this, he focused his attention and carefully looked at it a few times. His spirit was refreshed as he had already seen through some clues. The power of the mountains and rivers had clearly evolved into eroded runes. Not only that, but the profound meaning contained within was the wondrous method of entering the formation. Zhang Yan couldn't help but sigh inwardly at this extravagance. This continent was so vast, and if one wanted to lay out such a terrain on it, it would be extremely difficult. He had to have the ability to move mountains and topple continents. He secretly calculated in his heart, and after a short while, he understood the changes within, and his heart became firm. He moved in the direction of the formation door. After a few turns, suddenly, the heavens and the earth cleared up, as if he'd passed through some sort of maze, and he discovered that he'd already stepped into this world. His arrival alarmed the owner of this place. A wisp of white smoke flew out from the mountain. When he reached a high place, he dropped down again. Like water pouring down, the water flowed in front of him. On top of it stood a 40-year-old Taoist, his appearance was extremely elegant. A beautiful beard reached his chest, and he wore a magnolia robe. At this moment, he looked at Zhang Yan with a face full of surprise. He bowed and said, "Where did you come from?" Zhang Yan saw him step on the smoke and knew that he was also a core formation cultivator. He bowed and said, "I Zhang Yan, a cultivator from the Donghua continent. I saw this continent floating in the sky, so I came to take a look." I didn't want to disturb your peace. So it's a cultivator from the Donghua continent. The Taoist exclaimed and said, I Lu Gua, cultivate in this continent's vast path temple. Outsiders are rarely seen here, and it just so happens that I'm here to collect water today. It's fate that we've met. Why don't you come to my temple and have a seat? Zhang Yan originally came here to collect the green sun aura, but he couldn't avoid the owner of this place. This suggestion was exactly what he wanted, so he went with the flow and said, then I'll have to trouble you. After Lu Gua exchanged a few polite words with him, the two of them flew side by side towards the north. After traveling for 2 hours, they saw a Taoist palace built on the peak of a mountain. It had glazed glass and golden tiles, was surrounded by lush trees, and was surrounded by hundreds of birds. The atmosphere was grand. After entering the Taoist palace, Lu Guo led him to the main hall and ordered the servants around to serve tea. However, be it the Taoist children or servants, they were all quite old. They had white hair and were deaf and blind. He called them a few times before they responded and left with their backs hunched. Lu Guo couldn't help but feel a little awkward and said, I've let you see something embarrassing. There are usually no guests here, and I's busy cultivating. I usually go into seclusion for decades, so I forgot to change a few capable servants in time. Zhang Yan smiled and said, why don't you teach me a few breathing techniques to prolong my life? That way, I won't have to worry about these things. Cultivators would often go into seclusion for hundreds of years. Thus, the attendants by their side would usually pass down breathing techniques to them to help them live longer. If they were lucky, they would often be accepted as a disciple. Lu Guo sighed and said, how would you know that the people here are all stupid? It's hard to teach them. After a while, an old man came over with a cup of tea. Zhang Yan picked up the teacup and took a sip. It was fragrant, and after drinking it, there was a surge of spiritual energy that lingered in his chest, not dissipating for a long time. It was a top-notch tea. Lu Guo looked at Zhang Yan and asked curiously, just now, I'd like to ask you something. This Kunyu is not a paradise, but it's a secluded place. Ordinary people can't enter because there's a big formation outside. Since you can come here, you must be an expert in formations, right? Zhang Yan put down the teacup and said with a smile, I don't know any formations, but there's a hidden heaven and earth inscription in the landscape, which has already pointed out the way. I happen to be an expert in this, so I can come here. Lu Guo exclaimed and stood up excitedly. You know erosion inscription? Zhang Yan nodded with a smile and said, I know a thing or two. Lu Guo showed an impatient expression. He reached into his sleeve and took out a jade talisman. He held it above his head with both hands and said, please enlighten me, Taoist. Zhang Yan took it and circulated his spiritual energy. Lines of eroded runes appeared on it. He casually glanced at them and said, these are 4 lines of an incantation. It seems to be a method to open a formation. It's not difficult to decipher it. Let me and fellow Taoist write it down. He dipped his finger in the tea and wrote it down on the table. Lu Guo's eyes lit up and he looked at it without blinking. At this moment, he seemed to have solved a difficult problem, and there seemed to be an unconcealable excitement between his brows. He shouted, I see, I see. He suddenly looked up and grabbed Zhang Yan's sleeve. He looked at him eagerly and said, I'm a Taoist. Why don't you stay with me for a few more days? I still have a lot of questions I want to ask you. Zhang Yan looked embarrassed and said, I only come here occasionally. I'm afraid. Lu Guo couldn't help but feel anxious and said, Taoist friend, if you need anything in your cultivation, just tell me. I just hope you can stay for a few more days. Zhang Yan pretended to ponder and finally sighed. He said, Taoist friend, you are so kind. Then I will stay here for a few days. Lu Guo was overjoyed. He cupped his hands and said, good, good. Taoist friend, please stay for a while. I will be back soon. Zhang Yan smiled and returned the gesture. He said, Taoist friend, please go ahead. After Lu Guo bade farewell to Zhang Yan, he rushed into the inner temple excitedly and followed a tunnel that was dug out from the belly of the mountain to the back of the mountain. He crossed a jade bridge and came to the front of an abode of immortals. He shouted from outside, "Are the two senior brothers here? I would like to see you." After a while, the stone door opened and a Taoist child came out. He bowed and said, "Third master, first master and second master invite you inside to talk." Lu Guo tidied his robe and stepped inside. There were 2 pearls and lanterns in the cave. They shone brilliantly like it was daytime. On the east and west sides, there was a strange-looking Taoist sitting cross-legged. The one on the east side, Daoren, had a strange appearance. He was as thin as a stick and his eyelids were drooping, as if he was about to fall asleep. He wore an old white Taoist robe that was wrapped tightly around himself. He had a large cloak on the outside. In front of him was a slightly rusty copper furnace, but there was no incense burning. The person sitting on the west side. He had a short beard and was as fat as a ball. He had very little hair, which was why he only had a small bun on his head. He looked like a little sparrow sitting on his head. He smiled and looked very fat. He said, looking at Junior Marshall Brothers' complexion, "Did something good happen?" Lu Guo nodded and cupped his hands and said, "I would like to let the 2 senior Marshall brothers know that I saw a wandering Taoist outside today." The fat Taoist's expression suddenly tightened. He leaned forward and said in a deep voice, "Where did he come from?" Even Doran's expression changed slightly. He opened his eyes and looked over. Lu Guo said without hesitation, from what he said, he came from Donghua continent. From Donghua continent? The fat Taoist's expression relaxed a little. He slowly sat up straight and asked, "What is his cultivation level?" Lu Guo said, "Like me, he should be a golden core cultivator." When Daoren heard that it was only a golden core cultivator, he closed his eyes and said, "Since he is just passing by, then third brother should treat him well and send him away." The fat Taoist nodded. Then, with a resentful expression, he said, "Third junior Marshall brother, how could you let an outsider in? How did eldest senior Marshall brother take care of you? Luckily, this person is alone. If he had evil intentions, wouldn't you be inviting a wolf into the house? This will not happen again." Lu Guo panicked and quickly explained, "Brothers, you have wronged me. I did not invite him into the mountain. He broke the array and entered the continent himself." The fat Taoist was shocked and said, "How is that possible? Back then, the 3 of us received guidance from Uncle Master and spent dozens of years studying the array before we were able to enter the vast Qingdao Palace. How did this person enter this place without any guidance?" Lu Guo hurriedly said, "This is what I wanted to tell you. This person was observing the landscape outside and was guided by that technique. Just now." Hearing this, the 2 Taoists were visibly moved. Doran's fingers trembled, and his eyes shone brightly. He said, "So, this person can read the erosion runes?" Lu Guo hurriedly nodded and said, "I was afraid that he would deceive me, so I asked him to deduce a few incantations on the spot. After testing them, I found out that this person is indeed skilled in this Tao." Daoren was silent for a moment and said, "Where is this person now?" Lu Guo said, "He is still in the hall. If senior Marshall brothers allow it, I will arrange for him to stay in the monastery." Daoren and the fat Taoist's eyes met. He said, "Third brother, go and make the arrangements first. I will discuss with your second senior Marshall brother." Lu Guo bowed and said, "Yes, I will go now." He excitedly turned around and left. Watching him leave, the fat Taoist couldn't help but say, "Senior Marshall brother, if this person really knows the erosion runes, we must make him stay. We have wasted more than 300 years here for that." The old Taoist stretched out his hand and stopped him from speaking. He pondered for a moment and said, "There's no rush. We still don't know where this person came from. Let me take a look at him for a few days. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 439. For the next few days, every time Lu Guo had a problem, she would go to Zhang Yan for advice. He didn't refuse and deduced everything for her. Although Lu Guo was the only person in the vast path temple, Zhang Yan could tell that she wasn't a shrewd person. Sometimes, some words didn't seem to come from her mouth, so he guessed that there must be someone else behind her. He tested her a few times and found that whenever he inadvertently mentioned the tortoise-shaped mountain, Lu Guo would unconsciously reveal a nervous expression. Thus, Zhang Yan thought to himself, the tortoise-shaped mountain must be a very important place to this person. That's why she's so nervous. This is a bit troublesome. Uncle Yugu once said that this mountain is the best place to harvest qi. This place is also very important to me, so I need to think of a way to enter this mountain. However, he didn't know the details of the vast path palace, so he couldn't act rashly. But there was no point in wasting time like this. He needed to think of an idea as soon as possible. He thought about it carefully and felt that his knowledge of the eroded writings must be of great use to Lu Guo. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so attentive. He might as well use this point to make a big fuss, retreat in order to advance, and force the person in charge to come out. He would first see the situation of this place and then make plans. After making up his mind, he wasn't in a hurry to act. Instead, he waited patiently for a month under the other party's hospitality. On this day, he felt that the time was right. Taking advantage of the time when Lu Guo finished asking for advice, he said, "I've troubled fellow cultivator for many days. Today, I will leave." Lu Guo was caught off guard and said in surprise, "Fellow cultivator, you're leaving just like that?" Zhang Yan said sternly, "That's right. I travel the world in search of opportunities. How can I stay here and not leave?" These days, Lu Guo was used to asking Zhang Yan for advice every day. She felt that there were many things she didn't understand, but as long as he gave her some pointers, she would suddenly see the light. Now that she was in high spirits, how could she bear to let him leave? She tried to persuade him to stay. Unfortunately, no matter what he said, Zhang Yan's face was firm and he insisted on leaving. Lu Guo was so anxious that she was sweating profusely. In the end, she had no choice but to plead, "Since fellow Taoist wants to leave, there's no need to rush. Why don't you stay for one more day and allow I to be your host?" Zhang Yan cupped his hands and reluctantly agreed. "Thank you for your hospitality, fellow Taoist Lu. Then I will leave tomorrow." After Lu Guo left, she hurriedly ran to the back of the temple and complained, "Eldest martial brother, that fellow Zhang Yan is leaving. I've said it before, it's just wine and tea. It's just a small favor, how can it make this person stay?" Daoren, however, remained seated and motionless. Instead, he asked, "Junior martial brother, have you had a great harvest these few days?" Lu Guo nodded vigorously and said, "I've learned a lot. If this fellow Daoist Zhang is willing to stay for a few more days, I will definitely be able to break the 9th formation." Daoren nodded and said, "It seems that this person is also a real talent." He paused and asked, "Has he gone anywhere else these few days, or has he inquired about anything?" Lu Guo smiled bitterly and said, "These days, it's always been me asking him for advice. This fellow Taoist has never asked me anything. Apart from that, he doesn't even leave the house. If we're talking about schemes, it's us who ask him for help." The fat Taoist tilted his head and leaned forward. "Senior martial brother, aren't you being too cautious?" Daoren snorted and said, "This matter involves the treasures of the mountain. No matter how cautious we are, it's never too much." Lu Guo became anxious and stomped his feet. "But if this person leaves, where are we going to find someone skilled in eroding runes? Do we have to wait for another 300 years? At that time, I'm afraid we'll all be a pile of bones. Eldest martial brother, you're so muddle-headed." The fat Taoist was displeased and scolded, "Third martial brother, how can you speak to eldest martial brother like that? Do you have any manners?" Lu Guo lowered his head and cupped his fists. "Eldest martial brother, I spoke without thinking. Please forgive me." Daoren waved his hand and didn't seem to mind at all. He smiled and said, "It's fine. Third martial brother is just a little too impatient. However, you're right about one thing. In a few hundred years, we'll all be a pile of bones. What's the point of guarding this treasure mountain? Regardless of whether this person has ulterior motives or not, at this point, we can only invite him to give it a try. Lu Guo was overjoyed and said, "Does senior martial brother want to meet this fellow Taoist?" Daoren nodded and smiled. "You can invite him here. I will talk to him personally." Lu Guo was overjoyed. He said, "All right." He turned around and left in a puff of smoke. He was in a hurry to invite Zhang Yan. The fat Taoist was puzzled. He felt that what Lu Guo said was contrary to his senior martial brother's cautious style. He said, "Eldest martial brother, aren't you being too hasty?" Daoren smiled and said, "Don't worry, second junior martial brother. I've sent my disciples out to investigate and they've found out about this person's background. He's not a cultivator from the Middle Pillar state. Not only does he have no foundation here, he also has some grudges with the Lai Xian order. We'll ask him to decipher the eroded runes first. When we break the formation and obtain the treasure, we'll try to capture him and send him to the Lai Xian order. It'll be a great achievement. Isn't this killing two birds with one stone?" The fat Taoist came to a realization. He slapped his knee and said, "Senior martial brother, that's a good plan. But why didn't you tell third junior martial brother?" Daoren shook his head. Third junior martial brother is simple-minded. He doesn't know the ways of the world. If he shows any flaws, it won't be good. It's not too late to talk about it after we're done. The fat Taoist sighed. When we get the treasure, we can return to Pingdong. I'm sure junior martial brother will understand eldest martial brother's efforts. After waiting for a while, they heard footsteps. They looked up and saw a tall and handsome young Taoist with bright eyes beside Lu Guo. His sleeves fluttered in the wind, making him stand out from the crowd. The two of them entered the cave one after the other. Both of them stood up. Daoren cupped his hands and said with a friendly expression, "I'm sure this must be Taoist Zhang Yan. I'm Duan Muli, the temple master of Hao Xing Taoist Palace. This is my junior martial brother, Hong'an. I was in seclusion a few days ago, so I didn't come out to greet you. Please forgive me for my neglect." Zhang Yan took a look at this person. He saw a strange aura coming from Daoren. He had felt this feeling from Han Guzi before, so he had some guesses in his heart. He cupped his hands and said, "Temple Master Duanmu, you're too kind. Taoist Lu has been very courteous these days. I can't thank you enough for your hospitality." He turned his gaze and bowed to Hong Anong. The latter responded with a smile. Duanmu Li extended his hand and said, "Taoist Zhang, please sit." Zhang Yan sat down. After the four of them sat down, Duanmu Li chuckled. He said, "I invited you here today because I have a request." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said plainly, "I don't deserve it. Temple Master Duanmu's cultivation is far above eyes. What request do you have for me?" Duanmu Li saw his unapproachable expression, so he exchanged glances with Hong'an and smiled, "Taoist, don't be in a hurry to reject me." He raised his hand and a cloud of smoke floated up from the ground. It rose up and gradually condensed into the shape of a mountain. It was the full appearance of Kun Island. He pointed at one of the mountains and said, "Taoist, please take a look." Zhang Yan took a look and his eyes narrowed. This mountain was the tortoise-shaped mountain. Duanmu Li looked at the mountain and said emotionally, "I won't hide it from you. In my sect, there was a senior who hid several magic treasures in this mountain. It was rumored that there was even a true weapon. However, in order to sharpen the perseverance of the descendants, he left 36 formations. Any disciple who wants to take the treasures must remove all these formations. This senior was afraid that the descendants would not be skilled enough, so he hid them in the mountains and rivers. He used the art of erosion runes to hide the key to breaking the formations. However, we are shallow and do not understand the meaning. We can only look and sigh. Hearing this, Zhang Yan looked up at Lu Gua and said with a smile that was not a smile, "No wonder Taoist Lu has been asking me for advice these past few days. All of the incantations are hidden formations. So that's how it is." Lu Gua blushed and said awkwardly, "I'm sorry for making you laugh. I'm ashamed." The art of erosion runes was passed down from ancient almighties and contained the truth of heaven and earth. Even sects like the East Flower Continent that had tens of thousands of years of history were not proficient in it. The deduction method was passed down in secret and never leaked to outsiders. The sects of the Central Pillar Continent had risen and fallen several times, and this method had long been lost. Now that they had met Zhang Yan, he was their only hope. Duanmu Li's expression turned solemn. He stood up and solemnly bowed to Zhang Yan. He said, "I and my brothers have a presumptuous request. Since you are proficient in this method, why don't you join forces with us to break this formation? We will reward you generously when the time comes." Hong An and Lu Gua also stood up and bowed to Zhang Yan. An awkward expression appeared on Zhang Yan's face. He said, I am not a disciple of your sect. How can I overstep my authority?" Duanmu Li heaved a heavy sigh and said, "This old Taoist also knows that this request is too abrupt, but this matter is really too important to us senior and junior brothers, and we suffer from no one to help us. We've wasted several hundred years in vain, but we're still unable to enter the door. If fellow Taoist is unwilling to help us, then there's no more hope." When he spoke up to hear, he seemed to have made some sort of resolution, and he said in a low voice, "Then why don't we do this? If we're able to break through this formation, then I'll make the decision. Fellow Taoist can choose any magic treasure from within it and leave. Fellow Taoist Zhang, what do you think?" He stole a glance at Zhang Yan's expression and saw that he seemed to be moved. He was secretly delighted and hurriedly gave his junior brother a look. Hong An stepped forward and bowed. "Fellow Zhang, you are the only one who can help us now. Do you want us to kneel and beg you?" Lu Gua also had a pitiful expression, but he was sincere. He said, "Fellow Zhang." Zhang Yan seemed to be unable to endure the pleading of the three of them. He let out a long sigh and said, "Fine. Since Temple Master Duanmu earnestly requests this matter, I am willing to help. There is only one difficulty. If you three fellow Taoists don't agree, I would rather leave right now." The three of them were overjoyed when they saw him agree. Duanmu Li hurriedly said, "What do you need, fellow Taoist? Please tell us. As long as it's something that I and my senior brother can do, we will agree to it." Zhang Yan's expression suddenly became extremely serious. He said, "I have been practicing with fellow Taoist Lu for the past few days. I noticed that although this mountain and river's momentum contains the method to break the formation, it needs to interact with the formation. Otherwise, I won't be able to figure out the details. Therefore, I need to see the formation in person to have an idea." Lu Gua hurriedly stood up and said, "I can prove that fellow Taoist Zhang's words are true. A few days ago, when I was asking for guidance, there were several difficulties. Fellow Taoist Zhang once said that if I don't see the formation in person and can't verify it from the side, I won't be able to discern the true meaning of the formation even if I have the erosion glyphs." Duanmu Li pondered for a while and finally said, "What Taoist Zhang said is also a reasonable request. In that case, third junior brother, please move to Turtle Snake Mountain and observe the formation." Chapter 440. After Zhang Yan left Duanmu Li's place, he was led by Lu Gua to the foot of Turtle Snake Mountain. Since the mountain was locked by a formation, they couldn't fly, so the two of them entered the mountain through a small gravel path. After walking for less than 100 steps, he saw a clear green pond. It was about an acre in size, and the ripples were clear and crystalline. Waterfowl were swimming leisurely in the pond. The pond was surrounded by jagged rocks, shaded by trees, and a cave could be vaguely seen hidden behind it. The ground in front of the cave was laid with hexagonal jade bricks, which were swept clean. A young boy stood beside the two purple wooden doors. He was quite quick-witted, and called out from afar, "Third master is here." Full of joy, he pushed the door open and stood respectfully to one side. When they reached the door, Lu Guo first patted the child's head, then turned to the side and politely said, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, after you." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and stepped inside. Suddenly, the light in front of him dimmed. He had entered a cave. The cave was more than 500 feet long and wide, with stalactites hanging from the ceiling like thorns and bamboo shoots. The sound of water dripping was as clear as the strings of a zither. 2 bright jade lamps stood on the left and right, giving off a soft halo. There was a stone staircase in the middle that could accommodate 4 people walking side by side. However, the staircase was damaged everywhere, and moss had seeped into the cracks, as if it had been abandoned for many years. After Lu Guo, he walked into the cave and pointed at the small path. "Fellow Taoist, please take a look. This stone staircase leads straight to the peak of Turtle Snake Mountain, but there are 36 formation doors on the way. Back then, there was an uncle master from my sect who came here and lived for hundreds of years. He broke through the first 8 formations. I'm ashamed, I've studied it for more than 300 years, but I still haven't reached the 9th layer. I'm really useless." At this point, his face was also filled with shame. Among the 3 of them, he was the only one who knew a little about formations, but he didn't understand much. In addition, he couldn't decipher the eroded runes, so he could only waste his time here. Over the years, second senior brother Hong'an had repeatedly asked for help from the outside world to break the formation, but eldest senior brother Duan Muli had turned him down. He could only brace himself and continue. Fortunately, Zhang Yan's arrival gave him a glimmer of hope. The 2 of them walked up the stone steps. After walking up 108 steps, the path under his feet led to the exit of the cave. It was about 10 steps away. Zhang Yan's eyes lit up as he raised his head to look over. He noticed that he was standing on a 300 wide stone platform, and his position just happened to be at the back of Turtle Snake Mountain. At this moment, the sky was still bright and illuminated the surroundings, and what entered his eyes was an expanse of lofty and beautiful peaks. On the jagged cliffs, there were clusters of green velvet and tenacious vines in the cracks of the rocks. About 10 steps to the left of the cave door, there was another row of stone steps that led to the 2nd floor. Just as Zhang Yan was about to take a step forward, his gaze shifted. Next to the cave door, he found a 3-foot-tall bronze plate embedded deeply into the stone wall. There were many words written on it, and it was vaguely discernible that they were written in etchings, but it seemed to be from a long time ago. After being eroded by the wind and rain, it had long become indistinct. Lu Guo followed him over, pointed at it, and explained, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, there are etchings like this at the entrance of the 1st to the 8th floor of the formation. They are the secrets to breaking the formation. However, after breaking the formation, the spiritual energy has already dissipated, and it has long been rusted. I came here a long time ago, and the words are still quite clear. I was afraid that there might be something hidden in them, and it would be inappropriate if they were lost, so I made other copies." Zhang Yan nodded and praised, "Fellow Taoist Lu is meticulous and meticulous. May I know where those copies are now?" Lu Guo felt excited after hearing Zhang Yan's praise. He said, "I have these copies with me every day. They are all here. Please have a look." He took out a jade disc from his sleeve and handed it over. Zhang Yan reached out and took it. He held it in his hand and looked at it for a while. At first, he was surprised, but then he showed a thoughtful expression. Seeing his expression, Lu Guo moved forward and asked curiously, "Fellow Taoist, did you see anything?" Zhang Yan turned his wrist and put the jade disc into his sleeve. He said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist, you overestimate I. How could I see anything in such a short time? When we go back, I will carefully study it. Fellow Taoist, don't be anxious." Lu Guo sincerely cupped her hands and bowed deeply. She said, "Then I will leave it to you, fellow Taoist." After talking for a while, the 2 of them continued forward. This time, they didn't stop. They passed through 8 stone steps and arrived at the entrance of the 9th floor of the formation. Just now, they stopped. Zhang Yan saw that if they went further up, the mountain path would be covered by spiritual clouds. He looked into the distance, and from time to time, there would be illusory lights flashing. Seeing that he was standing a little closer, Lu Guo's expression changed. She hurriedly grabbed his sleeve and said in shock, "Fellow Taoist Zhang, don't go any further. This formation is extremely powerful. I previously released a few spiritual birds inside, and in the blink of an eye, they were all turned into meat paste." Zhang Yan smiled and gently broke free from her hand. He pointed forward and said, "Fellow Taoist Lu, don't worry. I just want to take a closer look at the engravings on the plate." Lu Guo let out a sigh of relief. She wiped the cold sweat from her forehead and said, "Fellow Taoist, please take your time." In front of the formation, there was still a bronze plate similar to the one they saw before. However, it was different from before. The surface of the plate was enshrouded in spiritual light, and the words looked like they had been engraved. It was obviously under the protection of the formation. Zhang Yan looked at it, and his expression became serious. He said in a deep voice, "The engravings here are several times more difficult than just now. I'm afraid I will have to spend some time to slowly deduce them." Lu Guo sighed and said, "I can't help you with this matter. I can only trouble you." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. He sat cross-legged on the ground and closed his eyes to meditate. Lu Guo saw that he seemed to be immersed in it. She was stunned for a moment. She walked around on the spot a few times before finally retreating quietly. After the footsteps went far away, after a while, Zhang Yan opened his eyes and released a stream of smoke, enveloping the stone platform. He then took out the hero's not fish drum from his sleeves and held it horizontally in front of him, whispering, "Is Shu here?" A green light flashed, and the fish drum true spirit came out. He took a few steps forward and looked at the formation in front of him. He clicked his tongue. Zhang Yan didn't stand up. He only said, "Uncle Master, can I harvest the Azure Yang astral spirit here?" The fish drum true spirit chuckled and said, "I can try." He stretched out his hand and a stream of clear air came out of nowhere. It slowly gathered in his hand and finally condensed into a grain of green jade the size of a grain of rice. After a while, there was another grain. As time passed, more and more grains gathered in his hand. After 2 hours, there were already over 100 grains in his hand. Zhang Yan stared at it. His eyes lit up. He stood up and said, "Is this the Azure Yang astral spirit?" He walked to the fish drum true spirit's side and reached out to grab a handful of it. He held it in his palm. The object was crystal clear, like a jadeite. It shone brilliantly, but its weight was light. Its aura was slightly heavy, and it floated up like dust. It was several inches high, but it didn't disperse. The fish drum true spirit was slightly dissatisfied. He said, "This place is still far from the extreme heaven. The essence energy contained in the astral spirit is too thin. Although it is useful to you, the effect is minimal. You might not be able to enter the Yuanying realm even after cultivating for 100 years. But if you have the ability to reach the peak of this mountain, it won't be an extravagant hope to break through the gate in half a cycle of 60 years. Zhang Yan looked up with a resolute expression. He clasped his hands behind his back and said, "Then let's go to the peak." At this moment, the sound of footsteps could be heard. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He waved his sleeves and gathered all the smoke in the area. The fish drum true spirit also disappeared. A moment later, Lu Guo came up the stone platform with a Tao child with delicate features. He cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist deduced the eroding runes. It must be quite tiring. You must have no one to serve you. Eldest senior brother ordered this little brother to send a Tao child here for you to use. If it doesn't suit your taste, this little brother will find someone else." Zhang Yan glanced at the Tao child. He saw that the Tao child was dressed like a jade carving and looked intelligent. However, his eyes were flickering. It was obvious that his thoughts weren't pure. Zhang Yan couldn't help but be surprised. How could he not know Duanmu Li's intentions? This Dao child was a servant in name, but in reality, he was worried about him. He was just using him to monitor him. He smiled and said, Temple Master Duanmu is considerate. Leave this Dao child here. Lu Guo patted the Dao child's back and said, quickly greet Daoist Zhang. The Dao child hurriedly bowed and said, Little Tong Zhong Xian greets Daoist Zhang. Zhang Yan responded indifferently. Lu Guo was afraid that she would disturb Zhang Yan's thoughts, so she hurriedly left after saying her greetings. After he left, Zhang Yan called Zhong Xian over and said, when I'm deducing the technique, you have to stand a little further away. You're not allowed to come within 3 zhang of me without my permission. Otherwise, if I accidentally kill you, it'll be your own fault for seeking death. Do you understand? Zhong Xian's face paled and he hurriedly said, This Dao child doesn't dare, this Dao child doesn't dare. Zhang Yan waved his sleeve and said, Step aside for now. Zhong Xian hurriedly retreated dozens of steps and stopped 10 zhang away. Just now, he couldn't help but reveal a trace of disappointment on his small face. He was actually not a servant boy, but a disciple that Duanmu Li had taken in 2 years ago. Other than to check on Zhang Yan's movements, he had also come with the intention of secretly learning the erosion symbol deduction technique. Seeing how cautious Zhang Yan was, he instantly felt that his chances were slim. Zhang Yan ignored him and calmed his mind to deduce the inscriptions on the bronze plate. After a moment, he could see that if he followed the orthodox method, it would take him a year and a half to fully understand it. Moreover, even if he obtained the method, it might not necessarily be the orthodox method. He would still need to use a spirit bird to break through the formation and verify it, which would delay him even more. It was easy to imagine how difficult the 27 formations would be. Fortunately, he had the remnant jade to help him, otherwise he would definitely be trapped here. However, just as he was about to borrow the remnant jade, a light suddenly flashed in his mind as if he had thought of something. With a flip of his hand, he took out the jade plate that Lu Guo had handed to him. When he looked at it carefully, he couldn't help but reveal a somewhat strange expression. These 8 formations didn't seem like much individually, but when they were linked together, it became somewhat interesting. Just from the inscriptions alone, it seemed that they went from shallow to deep, and the further they went, the more difficult they became. If it wasn't for someone who was proficient in this Tao, he would never have been able to see it. If his guess was correct, perhaps there was no need to go through so much trouble. He thought for a moment and flicked his finger. The stellar sword orb flew out and hovered beside him. This object was connected to his mind, so if someone approached while he was deducing, it would definitely alert him. Then, he reached into his sleeve and held the remnant jade. His mind sank into it and he patiently deduced. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 441. Zhang Yan was completely focused on deducing the inscriptions. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed, and in the remnant jade, it had been more than 3 years. When he withdrew his consciousness, all the doubts in his mind were gone. The inscriptions didn't just mention the method to break the formation, but also the method to set up the formation, and the formation array. Most importantly, all the techniques here were guided layer by layer, and they were arranged from simple to complicated. The changes contained within the previous formation would be formed upon the foundation of the next formation, and the grand formation after that would be formed in the same manner. Even someone who didn't know anything about formations, if they carefully studied these 36 formations, they could become a person with a rough understanding of formations after years of study. Zhang Yan boldly speculated that the senior who set up the formation probably wanted to use the Dharma treasure as a guide to teach his juniors about formations. Although he had the method to break the formation, it wasn't easy for him to break the remaining 27 formations with his current cultivation. He wouldn't be able to do it without at least 20 to 30 years. If it was another time, he could still calm down, follow the rules, and climb up step by step. At the same time, he could also study the Tao of formations. However, he had come here to collect the Qingyang Ganjing so that he could achieve Yuanying in time to show off at the sword competition of the 16 sects. Thus, he couldn't wait that long. Zhang Yan looked at the array door that was flickering with golden light and pondered for a moment. Actually, it was not that there was no shortcut to the mountain peak. Now that there was no one presiding over the formation, it meant that the changes within couldn't be activated. It could only move according to the formation. He had the method in his hands, so if he wanted to pass through the formation by himself, it would not be a difficult task. Even if there were some mistakes when crossing the formation, such as taking a wrong step or half a step, with the protection of his treasured robe and the divine contract cultivation technique, he would be able to block a few attacks. However, if he entered the formation just like that, it wouldn't be good if Duan Muli and the others had other tricks up their sleeves. After thinking about it for a while, his eyes flashed. He already had an idea. He formed a hand seal and pointed 3 feet away, saying, "Appear." After the mist passed, a substitute that looked exactly like him appeared, sitting cross-legged on the ground. This true image technique had been helped by the true seal essence energy. Now, the body that was formed was not only exactly the same as before. Moreover, there was no sense of rigidity or dullness in his expression. Apart from being unable to speak, he was no different from a real person. He thought that with this substitute here, he would be able to confuse them for a while and wait for Duanmu Mian and the others to realize that something was wrong. He had probably already exited the formation and reached the peak of the mountain. After circling the substitute once more and seeing that there were no more flaws, he waved his sleeves and walked into the formation door. He disappeared in a flash. Zhang Yan followed the instructions of the incantation and carefully walked up the mountain path. After half an hour, he successfully passed through this formation and arrived at the front of the 10th formation. This arrangement was exactly the same as before. There was still a bronze plate embedded in front of the array door, on which was written the method to break the array. He looked at it carefully and memorized it. Then, he sat down in a lotus position, holding the broken jade in his hand and silently deduced. 3 days later, he had already understood the key to passing the array. He smiled slightly. He stood up and strode inside. He walked and stopped, and before he knew it, 3 months had passed. At this moment, he was standing in front of the last formation. Zhang Yan stood in front of the formation door with his hands behind his back. His face was solemn. He was not in a hurry to enter, but he repeatedly deduced the method to break the array in his mind. After all, he only had a smattering of knowledge in the Tao of formations, so it was inevitable for him to make some mistakes. It wasn't all smooth sailing when he tried to break through the formation earlier, and there were times when he stepped on the wrong formation. Fortunately, he had the protection of the treasured robe mysterious technique, so he was able to break through without any mishaps. However, the further he went, the more difficult the formation became. This last big formation must be extremely powerful. If he made a mistake, he would be doomed. He had to be extra careful. After deducing for a full 10 days, he no longer hesitated. He lifted his sleeves, raised his feet, and walked towards the formation door. After walking for less than 20 steps, he suddenly heard the sound of the wind. It was like a cry, and the air was like a blade. With a "chi" sound, it cut open a wound on his face. After walking for a few dozen steps, he had hundreds of wounds on his body even with the protection of the treasure robe. After another 100 steps, his entire body was like a bloody man. The wind blew faster and faster, as if it was stopping him from moving forward. It made people suspect that if this continued, he would be skinned and torn apart. If it was someone else, they would probably suspect that they had walked into the wrong position. However, his expression did not change. His face was calm as if he did not feel anything. His footsteps were still firm as he walked forward. He had used a trick to get through this, and it was not the right way. It was expected that he would suffer some hardships, but as long as his life was not in danger, it did not matter. After walking another 10 steps, the sound of the wind dissipated, and the wind gradually stopped. He circulated his Xian Qi and the wounds on his body closed. When he raised his head again, he noticed that he had already stepped out of the formation and arrived at the top of Turtle Snake Mountain. The place he stood on was only 15 feet in circumference. 10 steps away, there was a strange white rock. It was enormous, without edges or corners, and it was shaped like an egg. The top half of it was buried in the sky. He raised his head and looked up. There were numerous cold and sharp winds raging above him. They spiraled to and fro, and they seemed to be within reach. He stood at the peak of the mountain and shouted. He took out the heroic fish drum in the air. As soon as this magic treasure appeared, it suddenly shook and transformed into a ray of light. It instantly broke through the wind and flew above the clouds. In just a few breaths of time, an enraged roar of thunder suddenly sounded out, shaking the heavens and the earth. Strong winds swirled as a rift was suddenly sliced open in the sky, revealing the void beyond the heavens. Numerous bolts of lightning danced wildly like dragons and snakes as they carried countless verdant sand sprouts as they flew towards the fish drum and converged. After a while, there was a sudden sound like a drop of water from a clear spring. A deep green jade fell from the crack. Zhang Yan caught it in his hand. He felt that it was smooth and glossy. Even if he didn't absorb it into his body, he could feel the unfathomable and shocking vitality within it. After being tempered by the fish drum, it had completely lost its violent nature. It was calm and peaceful, and it was suitable to be used. This green sun elite was originally a flying star that scattered dust. Because there were astral winds swirling above the extreme heaven, it prevented it from falling into the mortal world. Thus, it wandered around the extreme heaven. As for those towering peaks that towered into the clouds, they became the only places they could attach themselves to. After being illuminated by the sun, moon, and stars for 10,000 years, they absorbed the pure yang energy outside the void and were finally tempered into this form. Central Pillar Continent was originally the highest place in the 9 continents. This Kunyu Tortoise Snake Mountain was even built on top of the pillar. Since the 9 continents were created, countless green sun elite gathered here. Other than those cultivators above Yuanying, no one could go up here. That fish drum true spirit pushed aside the stellar chi and suddenly appeared from the gap. It said loudly, "Martial nephew Zhang, this azure dipper Yang can't be contaminated by the mortal world. Quickly refine it, I'll find another piece for you." Zhang Yan didn't hesitate anymore. He sat down cross-legged and with the green jade in his hand, he circulated his chi. In a split second, a wave of pure essence entered his body. The mana in his body immediately surged and almost burst out. Such abundant essence surprised him. But this thought only appeared for a moment before it was erased from his heart. He didn't think too much about it and focused on refining it. Suddenly, he closed his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, leaving only his inner breath and spirit to guide the chi. It was as if he had come back from death and went into meditation. He absorbed the green sun elite jade and was completely unaware of what was happening around him. At the bottom of Tortoise Snake Mountain, Zhong Xian was still monitoring Zhang Yan all day. He saw him meditating day and night, almost like a stone statue. After a long time, he also slacked off. At first, he reported once a day, then once every 10 days, and then once every month. On this day, when he was feeling bored, he suddenly noticed someone standing in front of him. He couldn't help but jump in fright. He looked up and hurriedly said, "Xiao Tong greets second master." Hong'an grunted. He looked at the substitute that Zhang Yan left behind and said, "Did this Taoist Zhang say anything before he went into meditation?" Zhong Xian lowered his head and said, replying to second master, "He didn't. Since he went into meditation, he still hasn't woken up." Hong'an waved his hand and said, "I have a few words with Taoist Zhang, you can leave for a moment." Zhong Xian didn't dare to disobey and said, "Yes, I will wait outside." Hong'an's small eyes were shining. He put on a smile on his face and walked forward. He stopped 10 feet away from Zhang Yan, raised his hands and bowed, saying, "Taoist Zhang, Hong'an is here to visit." Zhang Yan didn't say anything and didn't move. Hong'an looked at him in surprise and said something again. he still didn't get a response. He hesitated for a moment and probed, "Since Taoist Zhang has no time, I will come back another day." He waited for a while and saw that Zhang Yan still didn't say anything. He shook his head and turned around to leave, but a little suspicion arose in his heart. He stopped and slowly turned around. He looked at Zhang Yan's face for a while and moved his feet lightly. After a while, he reached out and put his hand on Zhang Yan's shoulder. His expression suddenly changed. His expression was uncertain for a while. He clenched and loosened his fists a few times. Just now, he returned to normal and walked out as if nothing had happened. He waved his hand and called Zhong Xian over. He said, "Taoist Zhang is at a critical point in his divination. Don't disturb him if there's nothing important. Otherwise, even if you're the disciple of eldest senior brother, I will still take your life." Zhong Xian knelt on the ground and said, "I will. I won't dare to ruin second master's business." Hong'an looked back once more, then left the mountain. With a leap, he transformed into a long smoke and flew away. Not long after, he was out of Kun Island. Then, he waved his sleeve and a flying talisman flew away without a trace. He gritted his teeth and said, "Senior brother, don't blame me. Even if you and I get this treasure, how can we guard it?" After the talisman was sent out, it flew into the sky. In the blink of an eye, it had already crossed thousands of rivers and mountains. Finally, it flew to a valley surrounded by green water and green mountains. After a few rounds, as if someone was receiving it, it went into a cave abode and fell into the hands of an ancient Taoist. This Daoren had white hair and a ruddy complexion. He wore a 9-beam crown and a sun and moon purple gold robe. There was a cloud above his head. He opened the letter and said coldly, "This Hong'an is really incompetent. He can't even guard the treasure. Daoren, I want to see who dares to take what the Lai Xian sect wants." To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.